It was late October in a small suburban town just outside of Dayton, Ohio. The kind of town where everybody everybody more or less knew each other, and the biggest excitement usually came from Friday night high school football games or the occasional car chase that ended in someone's front lawn. I was 17 that fall, a senior in high school, and home alone on a Friday night for the first time in months. My parents had gone to Chicago for the weekend to visit my aunt, Tarp, and my younger brother was at a friend's house for a sleepover. The house felt unusually quiet without anyone else in it. No background hum of conversation, no video game sounds or footsteps on the stairs, just stillness. I remember the night vividly. The air had that kind of chill that crept in through the cracks in the windows, and the wind outside rattled the half-dead leaves against the siding like dry fingers. I had planned to spend the evening watching movies and maybe playing a few video games. I ordered a pizza around 7, and by 8:30 I was two episodes deep into some true crime documentary series I had queued up. The house we lived in wasn't old, but it wasn't new either. Built in the early 90s, it had the typical creaks and groans that every house eventually settles into. I'd lived there since I was 9, so the usual house sounds didn't spook me. But that night, there was something off. I noticed it just after finishing the second episode, a soft, rhythmic creaking noise coming from upstairs, like a door slowly swinging open and then closing again. I paused the TV and listened. Silence. Then the creak again. I muted the television completely and leaned forward on the couch. The noise had stopped. I chalked it up to the wind, or maybe the upstairs hallway window being left cracked open. But I knew I hadn't opened any windows that day. Still, I didn't want to psych myself out. I went back to watching, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. You know how sometimes your instincts tug at you quietly, whispering that something's not right? That's what it felt like. An hour passed. It was just after 10 when the power cut out. 1 second, I was watching a reenactment of some cold case murder, and the next, total darkness. The house groaned again in the silence. The wind howled outside. I sat frozen for a few seconds, listening. The power going out wasn't uncommon where we lived, especially during windy nights. Still, something about the timing of it put me on edge. I got up and grabbed my phone for light. The battery was at 42%. Not great, but enough. I turned on the flashlight and made my way into the kitchen to check the fuse box. As I passed the sliding glass door to the backyard, I paused. The curtains were slightly parted, just enough for me to see out. There was nothing out there at first, just the reflection of my phone's light in the glass. But then something caught my eye. There was a man standing at the edge of the tree line. Not moving, not walking, just standing, watching the house. I backed up slowly, my breath caught in my throat. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call someone, but I hesitated. I didn't want to take my eyes off the door. Then I remembered the porch light had a manual switch in the kitchen. I flicked it on, and the backyard lit up in a yellow hue. He was gone. I waited, heart pounding, trying to calm myself. Maybe it was just some guy walking a dog or cutting through the neighborhood. But no one just stands still like that, especially not behind someone's house. I told myself to stay calm and locked the sliding door, double-checking it twice. I finally reached the basement stairs, flashlight in hand, and made my way down. The breaker panel was tucked behind the water heater in the corner. I opened the box and flipped a few of the switches, but nothing changed. It looked like the power had gone out for real, not just a tripped breaker. That's when I heard it again, creaking, this time closer. It was coming from upstairs. I turned off the flashlight for a second and listened. Creak, creak, pause, creak, the sound of someone deliberately stepping on the floorboards above me. I knew I hadn't locked the front door earlier. Panic surged through me. I dashed upstairs, skipping steps, my legs trembling. I paused in the living room, heart hammering in my chest, and heard the footsteps again. They were moving down the hallway, toward my room. I crept toward the front door and locked it, bolting the deadlock and securing the chain. Then I turned back to face the hallway. The only weapon I could think of was the baseball bat in the hall closet. I opened the door slowly, trying not to make a sound, and grabbed it. Then I stood there, bat in one hand, phone flashlight in the other, and waited. Every part of me wanted to run out the door and scream for help, but I couldn't move. It was like my body had frozen in place. I heard something crash upstairs, the sound of something heavy falling over, my bookshelf, I thought. That was enough. I ran out the front door into the street. I didn't even look back. I ran barefoot to the neighbors across the street and started banging on their door. Lights flicked on inside, and Mr. Crowley opened the door, bleary-eyed and in pajamas. "There's someone in my house," I gasped, nearly in tears. He didn't ask questions. He just stepped outside with me and called the police. While we waited, he offered me a blanket and some water, and I sat on their couch, shaking, listening for sirens. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. 2 officers went into the house with flashlights and guns drawn. I watched from the front yard with the neighbors, waiting. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Eventually, one of the officers returned. "There's no one inside," he said. "Nothing's broken or stolen, but your bookshelf did fall over in the bedroom. Strange that would happen on its own." I didn't know what to say. I hadn't imagined it. I heard those steps. They did a sweep of the backyard. One of the officers found footprints in the dirt by the tree line, just one set leading toward the house, none leading away. He said it was probably a prank, maybe someone trying to scare me. But I knew better. I could tell from the way the officer kept looking around like he was uneasy too. I spent the rest of the night at the Crowleys' house. I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every gust of wind outside had me on edge. When my parents returned the next morning, they were skeptical at first until the police report and the Crowleys backed up my story. A few nights later, I was trying to sleep back in my room when I heard a noise. Soft, distant tapping. It was coming from the closet. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was the wind again, or maybe a loose hanger shifting. Then the tapping stopped, and the closet door creaked open an inch. I didn't sleep in that room again for weeks. Years later, I found out that a man had been arrested a few blocks away for breaking into a home while the family was away. He'd been living in their attic for 2 days without them knowing. The police suspected he'd done it before. When I read the report, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Because I remembered what the officer had said that night, there was no sign of forced entry. And I hadn't locked the attic door in the hallway for months. I hadn't thought to check it that night either. I still don't know for sure if he was in the attic or if it was something else entirely. But every so often when I visit home and the wind blows just right, I swear I hear footsteps upstairs. Story, the end. It was the 3rd week of October when it happened, right in the thick of midterms and falling leaves, with the air in New Jersey turning sharp and cold. My parents had flown out to Arizona for a week-long trip to visit my aunt, and I had the house to myself. I was 20, a college sophomore taking classes online that semester, and staying at home seemed like the more affordable option. I wasn't scared of being alone, at least not until that week. The house I grew up in sits on a quiet cul-de-sac just off Route 46. We have a decent-sized backyard that leads into a narrow wooded area, maybe 100 feet of trees before the fence of the next development. Our neighbors are a mix of retirees and middle-aged families, friendly enough, but the kind that stays indoors once the sun dips. The house itself is an old 2-story colonial with creaky floors, a furnace that moans when it kicks in, and a basement that's always too cold. That Thursday night, it was just past 11:30 p.m. when I shut my laptop and decided to wind down. I'd been watching a documentary on ancient architecture, something boring enough to help me sleep, and had just finished brushing my teeth when I heard the first sound. A soft knock. Not loud, not insistent, just deliberate. I froze in place at the top of the stairs, toothbrush still in hand, eyes locking on the front door. It was far enough away that I couldn't see anyone through the narrow glass panel beside it. I waited a few seconds. Nothing. Figured maybe it was the wind, even though it was a still night. I went down, turned on the porch light, and peeked through the peephole. Nobody was there. Still, I felt something in my chest tighten a little, that vague, primal unease when something doesn't sit right. I locked the door, not that it wasn't already locked, double-checked the windows, turned off the downstairs lights, and went back up to my room. About 20 minutes later, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone with the bedroom lamp still on, when I heard the second knock. This time, it came from the back door. a completely different side of the house. Now my heart was definitely beating faster. Our back door led out from the kitchen onto a small deck, and there was a motion-activated light that should have gone off if someone had approached. I hadn't heard it click on. I grabbed my phone, got up slowly, and walked to the bedroom window that overlooked the backyard. I pushed the curtain aside just enough to peek out. The deck light was off, but there was someone standing just beyond the reach of it. A silhouette, unmoving, right at the edge of the tree line. I couldn't make out any features, just a tall, still figure. I blinked, thinking maybe it was just the shadow of a tree. But then it moved. Not much. Just a small shift, like someone adjusting their footing. I stepped back from the window, heart racing. I didn't want to call the police yet. What would I say? Someone might be standing near my backyard? I had no proof. I went downstairs quietly, kitchen lights still off, and tiptoed to the back door. I stood to the side and leaned just enough to peek through the blinds. Gone. I locked that door too, and this time slid the deadbolt with a shaky hand. I turned on all the lights downstairs, figuring maybe it would discourage whoever was out there, if anyone really was. Then I grabbed the old wooden baseball bat from the closet and took it upstairs with me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every creak of the house made me jolt. At some point, maybe around 3 a.m., I dozed off with the bat still beside me on the bed. The next day, I tried to be rational. Told myself it could have been a neighbor walking their dog, or maybe some bored teenagers messing around. But deep down, I knew it wasn't either of those things. I spent most of Friday tense and wired, checking out the windows constantly. Nothing unusual happened during the day. No strange figures, no knocks, no movement in the woods. But as night fell, that tight feeling in my chest returned. I locked every door again, closed the blinds, left lights on both upstairs and down. Around 1 a.m., I was just about to call it a night when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring out. No voicemail. I turned the phone over and sat it down. Then came the sound of glass, soft, like something tapping against a window. I turned off my bedroom lamp and listened. Tap, tap, tap. 3 soft taps. I moved to the window. It came from the guest room at the end of the hall. My legs didn't want to cooperate, but I forced myself down the hallway, bat in hand, muscles tight. The door to the guest room was open, and the room was dark except for the moonlight filtering in through the curtains. I stepped inside and moved slowly to the window. Another tap. This time I saw it. A hand. Pale. Pressed flat against the window pane, fingers slowly dragging down the glass. I gasped and stumbled back, knocking over a lamp with a loud crash. I bolted out of the room and ran to my parents' bedroom. Locked the door behind me, heart pounding like a drum. I called the police. I told them someone was outside my house trying to get in. It took them 25 minutes to arrive. When the officers searched the property, they didn't find anyone. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. But something strange. They found our side gate open. The gate that had been bolted shut since summer. One officer suggested maybe a deer or a stray animal brushed against the window, but I knew what I saw. That was a hand. A human hand. Long, bony fingers. Not a raccoon or squirrel. They told me to keep the lights on and call again if anything else happened. I didn't sleep that night either. Saturday morning, I was practically a zombie. I decided to stay with a friend for the rest of the weekend. I packed a bag, checked all the locks again, and as I was heading out the door, I noticed something odd by the mailbox. A single white envelope tucked between the slats of the post. No stamp, no return address. Just my name handwritten across the front. I stood there, frozen, holding it like it might explode. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph. Me, asleep in bed, taken through the window. My stomach dropped. My mouth went dry. I turned around and scanned the street, the woods, the neighboring houses. No one. I called the police again, shaking so hard I could barely speak. When they arrived, I handed them the photo. This time, they took it seriously. They dusted the mailbox for prints, canvassed the neighborhood, asked if I had any exes or enemies. I didn't. That night, I stayed at my friend Jason's house. He and I had been close since middle school, and he didn't even question it when I asked to crash for a few nights. I kept thinking about the photo. Someone had been watching me, waiting for me to be alone. They were close enough to take that picture and get it in my mailbox undetected. That realization made my skin crawl. Sunday passed quietly, no strange calls, no visits. I started to think maybe it was over. But around 2:40 a.m., while Jason and I were passed out in his living room, his Ring doorbell chimed. Motion detected. He checked his phone and sat up straight. "Dude, come look at this," he said. The video showed a man, tall, dressed in dark clothing, standing at the edge of Jason's driveway, just outside of the Ring camera's IR range. He never moved forward, just stood there, watching the house. He stayed for 11 minutes. Jason called the police. They searched the area but found no one. That was the last incident. After that night, it stopped. No more knocks, no more pictures, no more visits. The police never identified the man. They said it could have been a stalker, maybe someone passing through the area, but they didn't find anything to tie it to anyone local. When my parents returned, I told them everything. They didn't even question it. We installed security cameras, motion lights, a new alarm system. For weeks, I couldn't sleep without double-checking every window and door. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know if it was someone I passed once in a store or someone I'd unknowingly offended online. All I know is that I was home alone, and someone out there knew it. Someone watched me long enough to know my habits, my routines, what rooms I slept in. I never found out who he was. And I never slept in that guest room again. Story the end. It was the middle of October when I found myself home alone on a Friday night in our small 2-story house on the outskirts of Elk Ridge, Utah. I was 17, a high school senior, and my parents had driven 4 hours south to St. George to visit my grandma who'd just had hip surgery. They weren't planning on being gone more than a night, maybe 2 at the most. I told them I didn't mind staying back. I had homework to catch up on, and honestly, I liked the quiet. I wasn't a party kid and didn't hang out with big crowds. Besides, I knew all the neighbors around us, and our street was usually dead after 9 p.m. We lived on the last street before the desert hills started. Beyond our backyard was just flat dirt, scattered shrubs, and then nothing for miles until you hit the canyon wall. Our house was newer, one of those cookie-cutter developments from the late 2000s. Beige stucco, white trim, 2-car garage. Safe. Or it always had been. That night, I microwaved some leftover pizza, fed our orange tabby Milo, and FaceTimed my girlfriend Sophie for a bit before she went to her job at the gas station. Around 9:30, I turned off all the lights downstairs, double-checked that the doors were locked, and headed up to my room. I wasn't really tired, so I pulled out my laptop and watched a few dumb videos on YouTube. Milo curled up at the foot of my bed like he always did. It was just past 11 when I first heard it. A soft thud. It wasn't loud, more like the sound of someone bumping into something downstairs. I paused my video and listened. Milo perked his ears up too, which immediately put me on edge. He didn't react unless there was actually something to react to. But after a few seconds of silence, I figured maybe I hadn't latched the back door all the way and the wind pushed it. That happened once before when my dad left it cracked. I got up, turned on the hallway light, and quietly made my way downstairs. Everything looked normal. I checked the front door. It was locked. Walked to the back door, flipped on the porch light. The door was latched. No wind. Nothing. Still, I stood there for a second, staring out into the backyard. Our motion light had kicked on, so the patch of yard between the sliding door and the fence was fully lit. But beyond the fence, it was just pitch black desert. I could hear the wind blowing faintly through the brush, and something about that silence, it felt too still, like it was waiting. I locked the back door again, just to be sure, and made my way back upstairs. Milo hadn't moved from the bed. About 15 minutes later, I was brushing my teeth when I heard another sound. This time it was clearer. A distinct dragging sound, almost like something heavy being pulled slowly across the floor. It came from the living room. I froze, toothbrush still in my mouth, heart starting to pound. Milo was meowing now, pacing the hallway outside the bathroom. I spat and whispered his name, but he didn't come. I crept back to my room and grabbed the old wooden baseball bat I kept in the closet. Not because I expected to use it, but it gave me some sense of power. Every creak in the floor felt deafening as I tiptoed back down the stairs. The downstairs lights were off again. That was odd. I had left the kitchen light on before. I flipped on the hallway light and immediately noticed the living room rug was bunched up, like someone had dragged something over it, but everything else looked untouched. No broken windows, no open doors. I stood there gripping the bat tighter than I ever had, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. Maybe Milo had knocked something over, but then I realized he was still upstairs. As I was about to call out a shaky hello, my phone buzzed in my hoodie pocket. I jumped and nearly dropped the bat. It was a text from Sophie. Hey, just saw a guy walking up your street. Looked sketchy. You good? I stared at her message, rereading it twice. She lived only a few blocks away and always passed by my house on her walk to work. I texted back. What time? What did he look like? Her reply came fast. Tall, hoodie, black backpack, face kind of hidden. That was like 15 minutes ago. Thought maybe he was just passing through. 15 minutes ago was about when I heard the first sound. Now, the silence felt like pressure. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I walked slowly to the front window and peeked through the blinds. The street was empty. No cars, no people, porch lights glowing here and there, but nothing else. Then, right as I turned to walk away, there was a knock. 3 quick taps. Coming from the back door, not the front, the back. I didn't move. My feet were frozen to the spot. That door led to the fenced backyard, no gate. No way to get back there unless you walk through the desert brush. My hands started trembling on the bat. Another knock. Softer this time. Then a jiggle. The handle was being tested. I backed away and crouched behind the kitchen island. My mind was racing. I had no weapon except this bat. My phone was in my pocket. I unlocked it and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was trying to break into my house. She kept me on the line and told me to stay hidden. I had just given her my address when I heard something else. Glass shattering. Not loud, like a window being smashed, but a subtle crack. Then a squeaking noise. My heart dropped. The window over the laundry room. It didn't have a lock. My dad had been meaning to fix that latch for months. No one ever used that window. It was small, maybe enough for someone skinny to get through. Milo hissed loudly from upstairs. I covered the mouthpiece of my phone, holding my breath. The dispatcher asked, "Are you safe right now?" I whispered, "I don't know. I think they're inside." There were soft footsteps now. Careful. Slow. Trying not to make noise, but unmistakably human. I could hear them padding through the laundry room, down the hallway, toward the kitchen. I pressed myself flat against the floor. I could just barely see the edge of the living room from where I lay. A shadow moved across the far wall. Someone tall, dressed in dark clothing. He was in my house. The dispatcher told me officers were 5 minutes away. But 5 minutes felt like forever. The man moved closer to the kitchen, and I finally saw him. He had a hoodie pulled up, his face barely visible under the light. He was holding something, looked like a crowbar. I stayed dead silent, praying he wouldn't check behind the island, praying Milo wouldn't meow or give me away. But then, from upstairs, I heard Milo screech like he was being grabbed, followed by the sound of fast footsteps on the stairs. The guy bolted up to the second floor. I didn't think. I ran. Straight out the front door, barefoot, sprinting across our yard to the neighbor's house. I banged on their door until the husband, Mr. Chalmers, opened it in his boxers and undershirt. I must have looked crazy, but I managed to yell that someone was in my house. He pulled me inside and locked the door just as 2 cop cars came tearing down the street. Their lights cut across the dark like salvation. I watched from their window as the officers went in, guns drawn. They stayed in there for a long time. Eventually, one of them came over to talk to me. They found the laundry room window cracked open, the screen pried off, muddy footprints on the floor. The man had been upstairs in my bedroom. Milo was under the bed, scared but unharmed. But the guy? Gone. They figured he slipped out the back through the desert once he heard the sirens. They searched the area but never found him. No fingerprints, no stolen items, just a backpack he left in my closet, empty except for a kitchen knife and a rope. The cops said I was lucky. If I'd stayed even a minute longer, it could have been worse. My parents came back the next day, shaken. We replaced every lock, installed a security system, and barred the laundry room window. But I never felt safe in that house again. Not really, because I knew he had watched me, waited for me to be alone, knew just how to get in, and worst of all, he was never caught. Some nights, I still wake up in a sweat thinking I hear those 3 soft knocks on the back door. Story. The end. It was a Thursday in late October, one of those chilly nights where the wind sounds like it's whispering secrets through the trees. Most of the leaves had already fallen in our suburban Pennsylvania neighborhood, and the long limbs of bare branches clawed the night sky like black fingers. I was 17, a senior in high school, and I was used to staying home alone when my parents had to leave for the night. They were attending a retirement party about an hour away and wouldn't be home until well past midnight. They had left around 5:30 p.m., right after my dad got off work. Mom made a big deal out of telling me to lock all the doors, not answer the door for anyone, and call if anything seemed weird. She even made lasagna for me in advance and left it in the fridge with foil over it. I remember that clearly because I thought it was weird she was so anxious, like she wasn't normally that overprotective. I brushed it off at the time. After they left, I microwaved the lasagna and sat down to eat in the living room with some horror movie playing on Netflix. The movie was garbage. Cheap jump scares, and actors that looked more confused than scared. After about 30 minutes, I turned it off and figured I'd just hang out in my room, maybe get some homework done. It was around 8:45 p.m. when I heard it, what sounded like a soft knock at the front door. I froze for a second, not because it was late, people still knock that late sometimes, but because something about it sounded off. It wasn't the usual knock. It was 3 quick taps, then silence. Then, maybe 15 seconds later, 2 more taps. I stood still in the hallway, just listening. I crept over to the front door and peered out through the peephole. Nothing. Porch light was on, the driveway was empty, and our front yard looked as boring and still as ever. I waited another minute, but no one was there. Probably some kids playing a prank or just knocking and running off. I went back to my room and sat at my desk, trying to shake the weird feeling crawling up my back. I decided to message my friend Hannah, joking about the creepy knock, and she immediately said, "Don't open the door. Too many freaks out there." We kept texting for a bit, and the feeling started to wear off. I even made a cup of hot chocolate and went back downstairs to get comfortable on the couch again. The windows in our living room faced the backyard, and though the curtains were mostly drawn, I left one open just a little so I could see outside. The backyard was pitch black, except for the dim glow of a neighbor's porch light cutting through the far edge. By 10:30 p.m., I was ready to crash. I turned off all the lights, double-checked that the doors were locked, and went upstairs. I left the hallway light on out of habit and crawled into bed. Just as I was about to plug in my phone, I heard something that made my heart stop. The sound of the back door sliding open. I froze. Our back door was heavy, and it made a very distinct sound when it opened. The clunk of the lock, the rumble as it slid along the track. I sat upright, heart racing. I had definitely locked it before going upstairs. I remembered doing it. I even tugged on it to be sure. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew what I heard. My first instinct was to grab my phone and call my parents. But before I could do that, I heard the unmistakable creak of a floorboard downstairs. Not the kind of creak a house makes when it settles. This was the kind of creak that comes from someone's weight shifting as they take a step. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. I opened the text thread with my mom and typed, "Someone's in the house." I didn't hit send yet. I just had it ready. I got up ever so slowly and crept to my bedroom door. I kept the hallway light on, like I said, so it cast a faint glow under my door. For several seconds, I saw nothing. Then that glow was broken. Someone was walking down the hallway. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared at the strip of light beneath my door, watching the shadow move slowly, steadily past. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't my mom. The steps were too slow, too deliberate. I backed away and slipped into my closet, closing the door as quietly as I could. I had this habit since I was a kid of hiding in the closet when I got scared. It was one of those deep closets with sliding doors, packed with clothes and boxes. I nestled myself into the corner behind some old suitcases, my phone still in my hand. I turned the volume off and dimmed the brightness all the way. Then I heard my bedroom door creak open. Footsteps padded across the carpet. I could hear them moving, one at a time, pausing between steps like whoever it was listening or unsure. I texted my mom, "Someone is in the house. I'm hiding in my closet. Please call 911." Then I heard the closet door open. Slowly. I thought I was going to throw up. I didn't move, didn't blink. The door slid open, and whoever it was just stood there for what felt like forever. Then they closed it again. I waited, still as a corpse, for another 5 minutes. I could hear faint sounds downstairs now, something being moved or dragged. It was hard to tell. Then my phone vibrated. I nearly dropped it from the jolt. It was a text from my mom. Calling now. Stay hidden. We're 30 minutes away. Not a moment later, I heard the faintest sound of a voice downstairs. Then another. I couldn't make out the words, but there were definitely two people. Male voices, from what I could tell. One sounded frustrated, maybe even scared. The other was lower, calmer. It got quiet again for a few minutes. Then I heard the front door open and close. I waited in that closet for another 20 minutes before I even thought about moving. When I finally crawled out, I could barely walk. My legs were numb. I peeked into the hallway, empty. I crept downstairs, heart pounding in my ears. The back door was wide open, and something else. Our kitchen drawer with all the knives in it was pulled out halfway. I ran back upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom until my parents got home. My mom was crying before she even got through the door. My dad checked the house and called the police. When they arrived, they didn't find any signs of forced entry. Nothing was taken, but there were muddy footprints by the back door. 2 sets. One pair of heavy boots, the other looked like worn-out sneakers. Both entered, but only one set exited. The officer told us something that still makes my stomach turn. It looks like the second person may still be in the house when the first one left. There's no exit prints for them. They searched the house top to bottom. Attic, crawl spaces, closets. Nothing. But here's what made it worse. In our basement, behind a stack of storage bins, they found an old blanket, an empty water bottle, and a bag of peanuts. Someone had been staying down there, maybe for days. They figured the first guy broke in and didn't know someone else was already hiding in the house. Maybe they crossed paths. Maybe that's why I heard 2 voices, one calm and one agitated. Maybe one of them left because the other was dangerous, or because they realized the house wasn't empty like they thought. We never found out. After that night, I couldn't sleep without double and triple checking every door, every window. I begged my parents to install a security system, and they did the next week. Cameras, sensors, the works. It's been 3 years since that happened, and I still don't stay home alone at night if I can help it. Sometimes when I think about it, I remember how quiet those footsteps were, how the closet door opened, how someone stood there just inches from where I was hiding and then closed it again. What were they looking for? What would have happened if I had coughed or made a sound? I don't think I'll ever want to know. Story the end. It was a Friday night in late September, the air outside turning crisp and cool, the trees just starting to blush with autumn color. I was 17 at the time, a senior in high school, and my parents had gone out of town for the weekend to visit my aunt and uncle in Vermont. I had insisted on staying home. I had work, homework, and the truth was, I loved having the house to myself. The silence, the freedom, the ability to blast whatever music I wanted, eat ice cream straight from the tub, and not answer to anyone. It was the kind of freedom a teenager doesn't get often, and I intended to enjoy it. The house we lived in wasn't huge, but it was older, built in the early 1950s, with creaky wooden floors and one of those heavy, rattling furnaces that kicked on like a freight train every so often. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac in a quiet neighborhood in upstate New York. We had neighbors close enough to hear if something really loud happened, but not so close they'd notice anything subtle. That night, I had just finished a shift at the local grocery store and got home around 8:30. I changed into pajama pants and an old hoodie and reheated some leftover lasagna in the microwave. I remember everything in vivid detail. The way the microwave light flickered slightly as it ran, the ding it made, how I sat cross-legged on the couch watching a horror movie I'd already seen twice before. It was some cliché slasher flick, more ridiculous than scary, but I liked the background noise. Around 10:45, I shut it off and decided to go to my room. I had to work again early Saturday morning. I double-checked that all the doors were locked. The front door, the back sliding glass door, and the door to the garage. I always had a weird paranoia about that one, even when nothing strange had ever happened before. I went upstairs, brushed my teeth, and climbed into bed with my phone. I remember scrolling through Instagram, replying to a couple of Snapchats, and then just sort of dozing off. It was probably around 12:30 when I finally fell asleep. I don't know how long I had been asleep when I first heard the sound. It wasn't loud at first, just a soft, dull knock. Not at my bedroom door, not at the front door either. It sounded like it was coming from downstairs, maybe the kitchen. I jolted awake, heart pounding. For a moment I thought it was part of a dream, but then I heard it again. This time louder, a steady, deliberate knock. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. I grabbed my phone and glanced at the time, 2:17 a.m. I sat up, holding my breath, listening. No other sounds, just the faint hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I strained my ears. Nothing. I considered ignoring it. Maybe it was the pipes or the furnace again, but this didn't feel the same. The furnace was a mechanical roar, rhythmic and recognizable. This was intentional. I got out of bed slowly, moving quietly across the room. I opened my door a crack and peeked out. The hallway was dark. I had left the nightlight plugged in downstairs in the hallway by the kitchen. It always cast this dim orange glow that I found comforting. But now, I didn't see it. In fact, the house seemed darker than usual, like the power had gone out, but my phone still had service, and the LED clock on my nightstand was still glowing. I started to descend the stairs, barefoot, trying to avoid the steps I knew would creak. I was halfway down when I heard it again. 3 knocks, slow, heavy. But this time, it was followed by the unmistakable creak of the back sliding door. I froze in place. Someone was at the back door. I knew I had locked it. I always did. My heart thudded in my chest, thumping against my ribs like it wanted out. I crept down the last few steps and crouched behind the wall near the kitchen. There was a shadow, a figure standing just outside the glass, barely illuminated by the faint moonlight leaking through the trees. I couldn't make out details, just the shape. Broad shoulders, tall, definitely a man. He knocked again, 3 times. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. I just stared at that dark shape through the glass, praying he couldn't see me in the shadows. After about a minute, which felt like an hour, he stepped back and walked away, disappearing into the night. I waited another 5 minutes before moving. I crawled to the hallway to check the front door. Still locked. The garage door was secure too. I crept back to the sliding door and peeked through the curtain. No one. The backyard was empty. Still, I didn't feel safe. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what had happened. She stayed on the line with me while dispatching a unit to my house. I turned on every light in the house and waited, shaking. 2 officers showed up about 15 minutes later. They checked the backyard, the side of the house, even went into the woods behind our fence. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry. They told me it was probably a prank, maybe someone drunk or high. I didn't believe that. The knocks were too deliberate. He didn't try to break in. He wanted me to hear him, to know he was there. The cops offered to stay for a bit or let me call someone, but I told them I'd be okay. I didn't want to seem like a baby, and I thought maybe they were right. Maybe it was just some messed up joke. I barricaded the back door with a chair and a heavy coffee table and went back upstairs, though I didn't sleep a wink the rest of the night. The next morning, I was exhausted but made it through my shift. When I came home, I found something that made my stomach drop. On the outside of the sliding glass door near the bottom corner, someone had scratched something into the glass. It was faint, almost unnoticeable unless the light hit it just right. 2 words, "You're next." I called the police again. They came out and documented it, said it looked like it had been done with a key or a knife. Again, no prints, no suspects, nothing to go on. My parents came home the next day and I broke down telling them everything. My dad replaced all the locks and installed cameras around the house. For a while, I didn't want to be alone. I'd flinch every time I heard a creak or knock. Weeks passed, the footage didn't catch anything unusual, no one returned. But I never forgot those knocks. That shadow on the glass. And then about a month later, a neighbor down the street, 3 houses away, was found dead. An older woman who lived alone. No signs of forced entry. Known cause of death. The coroner said it looked like she died of fright. Her door had been unlocked. I didn't say anything to the police. What could I say? Just that I remembered the way the man had knocked. 3 times. Pause. 3 more. the same rhythm I sometimes still hear in my dreams. Story, the end. It was late September in North Carolina, the kind of evening where the wind just started picking up and the air smelled faintly of dry leaves. I was 16, and my parents were out of town for a wedding in Virginia. They were going to be gone the entire weekend, and I had opted to stay home. My mom wasn't thrilled about the idea, but I was adamant. I wasn't a kid anymore, I told her, and I could handle one weekend alone. Friday evening passed uneventfully. I microwaved some leftover spaghetti, played video games for a few hours, and fell asleep on the couch with the TV still on. I remember waking up sometime in the middle of the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, to silence. The TV had timed out and shut itself off, and the room was pitch black aside from the dim green glow from the router across the room. I dragged myself upstairs, brushed my teeth in the dark, and fell into bed without a second thought. Saturday was quiet. I didn't have any plans, so I just lounged around the house. I texted a few friends, but no one was free to hang out. I figured I'd have a lazy weekend. At some point in the afternoon, I walked to the gas station down the street to grab some snacks. It was maybe a 10-minute walk each way. I was gone for about half an hour at most. When I got back, something felt off. It was subtle at first, just a strange feeling, like I wasn't alone in the house. I remember pausing in the entryway, bags of chips and soda in my arms, and just standing there, listening. The house was silent, but it wasn't the comforting kind of silence. It was hollow, like the air had been sucked out of the place. I tried to brush it off as paranoia and went to the kitchen to drop off the snacks. I didn't notice anything missing or moved, but when I passed by the stairs, I swear I caught something in the corner of my eye. A movement, just a flicker, like someone had peeked from around the corner at the top of the stairs and ducked back. I stood frozen, heart pounding, staring at the staircase. "Hello?" I called up. My voice cracked slightly. "Is someone there?" Nothing. No footsteps, no voice, no sound at all. I grabbed a broom from the corner and crept up the stairs. My legs felt like jelly with each step. I checked every room, my bedroom, my parents' room, the guest room, even the linen closet. Everything was exactly as I had left it. I checked under the beds, inside the closets, even behind the shower curtain in the bathroom. Nothing. Feeling stupid, I went back downstairs and forced myself to laugh. I even texted my best friend Gavin and told him I was going crazy. "Classic horror movie symptoms," he replied with a laughing emoji. "If you hear footsteps in the attic, run." That made me chuckle a little. I turned on all the lights in the house, even though it was still daylight outside. I decided to keep myself distracted and started a movie. By the time it was dark out, I was feeling mostly normal again. Until the knocking started. It was subtle at first, just a few light taps on the back door. I paused the movie, the room going quiet. The knocking stopped. I got up slowly and walked into the kitchen, which had a clear view of the back door leading to our small backyard and the woods behind it. I stood in the dark kitchen for a moment, listening. Knock, knock, knock. 3 soft, deliberate knocks on the glass. I flicked on the porch light and stepped closer. There was no one there. Just the backyard, empty and dark. The trees swayed gently, casting long, slow-moving shadows. I grabbed my dad's old hunting flashlight from the closet and went out onto the back porch. I swept the yard with the beam. Nothing. No footprints, no animals, no person. I even checked along the side of the house. Nothing but grass and leaves. I locked the door tightly when I came back in, then double-checked every other lock in the house. I was starting to feel genuinely unnerved now. I turned off the movie and switched to the news, trying to feel more grounded. But I couldn't stop thinking about the knocks. At around 11:30 p.m., I was lying on the couch scrolling through TikTok when the power went out. Everything went dead. Lights, TV, the Wi-Fi, even the streetlights outside the window. Complete blackout. For a moment, I just lay there hoping it was a glitch, but it wasn't storming. There was no wind, no reason for the power to cut out. Then I heard something from upstairs, a floorboard creaking. Not the kind that happens randomly with old houses, the kind that happens when someone's walking. I sat bolt upright and grabbed my phone. No service. I couldn't even send a text. I moved as quietly as I could, grabbing the flashlight again and heading to the staircase. I pointed the beam up into the darkness. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. Another creak, this time closer to the landing. I backed away from the stairs, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't call for help. The power was out. I considered running out the front door, but what if someone was waiting? What if this was a trap? I decided I had to get out. I threw on my sneakers and opened the front door. Just an inch. It was chained from the inside. I never used the chain. I never even touched it. I hadn't locked it like that. That's when I realized whoever was in the house had chained it from the inside. Someone was in the house. I stumbled back, pure panic setting in. I sprinted to the kitchen to try the back door. It was still locked, but I yanked it open. And standing just beyond the threshold, bathed in faint moonlight, was a man. He was barefoot, clothes dirty like he'd been living in the woods. His face was smeared with what looked like mud, and his eyes, they didn't blink. They didn't even look human, just black pits. I screamed and slammed the door shut, twisting the lock and then shoving the heavy table in front of it. I ran back to the living room, trying to remember where my dad kept the gun. He didn't have many, but I knew there was a pistol somewhere, maybe the safe under his bed. But then I heard something else, a click from the basement door. It slowly creaked open, and from the darkness below, I swear I heard breathing. I grabbed a kitchen knife and backed into the living room, pressing my back to the wall. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't leave. I couldn't hide. I felt completely trapped. That's when the footsteps started coming up the basement stairs. I ran into the bathroom on the first floor and locked the door. I crawled into the tub, pulled the shower curtain closed, and held my breath. My phone battery was at 3%. I turned off the flashlight and curled into a ball, praying, literally praying, that whoever it was wouldn't come in. I heard the door creak open downstairs, then silence, then footsteps walking through the living room, into the kitchen, around the hallway. I couldn't tell if it was one person or more. At one point I thought I heard whispering, low, guttural, like someone talking through water. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. The bathroom doorknob jiggled, softly at first, then more violently. They were trying to get in. I gripped the knife so hard my hand started to cramp. I didn't dare move. I couldn't make a sound. The knob stopped turning, and there was silence for a long time. Then I heard the front door open. Someone had unlocked it. A second later, it slammed shut. I stayed in that bathtub until morning. The sun rose slowly, and birds started chirping outside. Light poured into the small bathroom window. It felt surreal, like I dreamed the whole thing. But I knew I hadn't. When I finally came out, every door in the house was wide open. The front door, the basement, the back. The kitchen table was flipped on its side. My dad's safe was open. Nothing had been taken. But on the wall above the couch, scratched into the paint with something sharp, were 4 words. You shouldn't be alone. The police came, took a report, but didn't find any evidence of forced entry. They chalked it up to a prank, or maybe a drifter. They didn't believe me about the man at the back door, or the whispering, or the scratches on the wall, even though I showed them. They said it could have been old. Probably kids, one officer said. Nothing to worry about. I don't stay home alone anymore. Not ever. Not even during the day. Because I know someone was in the house with me that night, and they knew I was alone. Story the end. The night my parents left town, I was left alone in our house for the first time in my life. I was 19, a college sophomore, and while I'd stayed home alone before for an evening or two, this time it was going to be for 3 whole days. Mom and Dad were visiting relatives across the state, and I declined the invite to join because of school and a part-time job. They reassured me it was safe. Our neighborhood was quiet, the kind where kids played outside until sunset, and everyone knew each other. I was confident too, maybe a little too confident. The first night was uneventful. I cooked dinner, binge-watched a show, and fell asleep on the couch by midnight. The house was cozy, the windows locked, doors bolted. Still, I found myself checking the locks every hour, a nervous habit that probably started after a scary movie binge. But it was the second night that everything started to unravel. I was studying in my bedroom, laptop glowing on my desk, headphones on, when I heard it. A soft tapping noise coming from the living room window. At first I thought it was rain. The forecast had called for scattered showers. But when I took off my headphones and sat perfectly still, the tapping came again, deliberate and steady. I froze. Our living room window faces the street, but the street was empty. No cars, no people. I told myself it was probably just a branch brushing against the glass. We had big trees out front. I wanted to believe that so badly. I went to the window and peered out. Nothing. Just the dark street, empty and silent. My heartbeat thumped hard enough to drown out all other sounds. I pulled the curtains closed and locked the window again, triple checking the latch. Then I sat back down at my desk, convincing myself it was nothing. About an hour later, I was in the kitchen grabbing a midnight snack when I heard the tapping again, but this time it was on the back door. The back door was glass with a deadbolt lock, a simple wood frame. I wasn't supposed to go out the back door after dark because of a weak porch light and some broken steps, but I knew I had locked it before I started studying. I approached slowly, each step careful, trying to stay quiet. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. Just the backyard, shrouded in shadows. I strained my eyes, trying to see if there was anyone crouching or standing near the door. Nothing but trees in the moonlight. I leaned in closer, and suddenly the tapping stopped. The silence was more unnerving than the noise. I stayed there for what felt like forever, then slowly backed away and bolted the door again. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, a raccoon or a possum, but the feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. I tried to focus on my textbook and study, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I kept glancing toward the door. Later, around 3 a.m., I was woken up by the sound of the house's alarm system. It was shrill and piercing, a sound I had never heard before. The alarm panel by the front door blinked red and the siren echoed through the rooms. I scrambled out of bed, my heart pounding like a jackhammer. I fumbled with the keypad to turn it off, hands trembling, but the alarm wouldn't stop. I pressed every button, entered the code multiple times. Nothing. And then, through the window beside the front door, I saw it. A shadow, tall and broad, standing just outside on the porch. Frozen, I stared, unsure if I was dreaming or awake. The figure stood motionless for a moment, then moved quickly, disappearing into the darkness. I called 911 immediately. The dispatcher told me officers were on their way and advised me to stay inside and lock all doors and windows. I barricaded myself in my room, grabbed my phone, and sat on the bed listening to every sound. Minutes later, I heard the faint sound of sirens, then voices outside. Police cars pulled up, flashing red and blue lights illuminating the front yard. Officers came inside, checked every corner of the house, but found no sign of anyone. No footprints, no forced entry, nothing out of place except the alarm being triggered. They stayed for a while, asked me questions, reassured me, but left with no arrests or suspects. I was too shaken to sleep. I stayed awake all night, flashlight in hand, watching the windows and doors. The next day, I called my parents and told them everything. They said they'd be home early and that I should call them or the police if anything else happened. That evening, just as the sun was setting, I was in the living room when I heard the tapping again. The same slow, deliberate tapping, but this time it was from inside the house. It came from the basement door. Our basement was unfinished, with creaky wooden stairs leading down. My parents rarely went down there except to store old stuff or do laundry. I never went down alone because the house always felt colder near the basement, and the lights there were dim and flickering. I stared at the basement door. The tapping was steady, slow, like someone knocking. I didn't want to check it. I didn't want to know what was down there. I called out, "Hello?" My voice trembled. No answer, only the tapping continued. I grabbed my phone, ready to call 911, but then the door handle started to slowly turn. I stepped back, heart racing, backing away toward the kitchen. The door creaked open, just a crack, but I could see a shadow, a silhouette that didn't belong. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and ran to the front door to check the locks. For the next hour, I sat on the couch, lights on, phone in hand, scanning the windows and doors. At one point, I heard footsteps upstairs, slow, deliberate steps on the hardwood floors. But I was home alone. I called the police again, but they said there was no way anyone could have gotten inside without leaving evidence, and nothing was found during their last check. I tried to convince myself I was imagining things, maybe hearing noises caused by the old house settling. But that night, I barely slept. On the third night, I stayed up all night with every light on, every window locked. Around midnight, the phone rang. I jumped, almost dropping it. Caller ID was blocked. I answered cautiously. The line was silent. Then a whisper, so faint I thought I imagined it, a voice saying, "I'm here." I hung up immediately and called 911. They said they would dispatch officers again. Within minutes, sirens blared outside. The police searched the entire property again, inside and out. Footprints, no one hiding anywhere. I told the officers about the phone call, the tapping, the footsteps. They listened but seemed skeptical. "You're safe now," one officer said. "We'll stay until your parents get home." They stayed for the rest of the night. The next morning, when my parents arrived, the officers left. I told them everything, and they promised to install a better security system. The house felt different after that, more shadowed, colder. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear tapping at the windows or footsteps on the floorboards. I don't know who or what was there, but I know one thing. I was never truly alone those nights. Story the end. It was a cold November night in a small suburb of Ohio when Sarah found herself alone in the house for the first time in years. Her parents had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving her, a 17-year-old high school senior, to take care of the family home. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal, just a quiet weekend alone, some homework, and maybe a movie or two. But as the night wore on, things took a turn Sarah could never have expected. Sarah's parents had left early Saturday morning, loading their luggage into the car before the sun was even up. She'd begged them to let her stay alone, eager for a taste of independence. The house was a modest two-story with a fenced backyard, located on a quiet street where neighbors barely crossed paths. Normally, the peace was comforting. Tonight, it felt different. She spent the day cleaning and watching TV, occasionally texting her best friend Jake. Around 7 p.m., she made dinner, just a frozen pizza, and settled in the living room with a blanket. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the settling wood frame. At about 8:30 p.m., she heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the front door, like someone knocking lightly. Sarah froze, listening. The house had been empty all day and nobody was supposed to be coming over. She checked the clock. 8:30 p.m., definitely too late for any delivery or visitor she was expecting. Tapping again, soft but deliberate. She told herself it was probably just a branch hitting the window or a loose shutter banging in the wind. The street was quiet. She couldn't see anyone outside. Her phone buzzed. A text from Jake. "You good? You seem off." She typed back, "Yeah, probably just the wind, nothing." But her heart raced a little. Deciding to ignore it, she grabbed the remote and flipped through channels. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught a movement in the living room window. A shadow flitted past outside. Her stomach dropped. She stood up and walked slowly to the window. Peeking through the blinds, she saw nothing but the dark driveway and the empty street. The porch light flickered slightly, casting eerie shadows. She closed the blinds and locked the door behind her, feeling silly but a little unnerved. Trying to shake off the feeling, Sarah went upstairs to her bedroom. She closed the door, locked it, and turned on her laptop to do some homework. An hour passed. The house was quiet. Then came the sound. Slow, deliberate footsteps on the wooden porch outside her bedroom window. Not tapping. Footsteps. Her breath caught. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. The call went through and a calm operator answered. Sarah whispered her address and explained the situation, that she was alone and heard footsteps outside. The operator told her to stay on the line and remain quiet. Sarah crouched by the window, heart pounding. Outside, footsteps paused. Then the porch light flickered again and went out. Complete darkness, a loud creak. The porch floorboard groaned under weight. Sarah's eyes darted to the door. The front door handle rattled. "Hello?" A rough male voice whispered from the other side. Sarah's hands trembled. She whispered back, "Go away." No answer. The handle turned slowly. The door was locked, but the rattling grew more aggressive. Suddenly, a loud bang against the door, as if something heavy had slammed into it. Sarah screamed softly and dropped the phone. The line went dead. Panic surged through her veins. She scrambled to pick it back up, hands shaking, but the operator's voice was gone. Footsteps started circling the house outside, crunching on gravel. She ran to her closet, locked the door, grabbed a flashlight and the kitchen knife she had brought upstairs earlier just in case. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jake. Are you okay? I called your house, but no answer. She texted back, Someone's outside. Call the police. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. Minutes felt like hours as she huddled in the dark closet. She could hear noises outside, footsteps, whispers, the faint sound of breathing. Suddenly, the back door slammed shut somewhere in the house. Her blood ran cold. She realized the back door was supposed to be locked. She had checked it twice before heading upstairs. Now she was trapped. Her phone rang. Jake's number. With trembling hands, she answered. Sarah, are you there? I'm calling the police now. Stay calm. Okay, she whispered. Suddenly, the sound of shuffling footsteps on the stairs. The closet door handle rattled violently. Sarah held her breath, clutching the knife. The handle stopped. Then, silence. Then a whispered voice, I know you're in there. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. The voice was low, menacing. She was frozen. A loud crashing noise from the living room startled her. Police are on the way. Stay put, Sarah, Jake said, urgency in his voice. The footsteps moved away from the closet. Then, a slow retreat down the stairs. Sarah waited, terrified. Suddenly, flashing lights flooded the windows. The front door burst open. 2 officers rushed in. Sarah ran out of the closet, crying. They searched the house thoroughly. Outside in the bushes near the back porch, they found a man crouching, dirty and disheveled. He had no ID, but officers later identified him as a local drifter with a history of break-ins. Sarah was shaken but unharmed. The police told her she was lucky they arrived when they did. The man had likely intended to break in and harm someone. That night, Sarah learned what it truly meant to be alone, not just physically, but vulnerable in the quiet dark of a house that suddenly felt like a trap. The next day, she called her parents, her voice shaky but relieved. I'm okay, she said, but I don't want to be alone again. The incident made headlines in the local paper, a stark reminder that even in peaceful suburbs, danger can lurk unseen, and sometimes being home alone isn't safe at all. Story the end. I remember the night clearly, even years later. It was one of those ordinary Friday nights in late October, in a small town in Ohio. Not much happening, just the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business. I was 17 at the time, still living with my parents in a modest 2-story house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood. That night, my parents had left town for the weekend to visit my grandmother a few hours away. I was home alone for the first time with the whole house to myself. My older sister was at a friend's house, and I was planning to spend the evening watching movies, eating junk food, and playing video games. I was comfortable enough with being alone, but I'd never experienced anything like what happened that night. I still shudder when I think about it. The evening started normally. I remember texting my sister to check in, then ordering a pizza around 7 p.m. The delivery driver knew the neighborhood, so it was quick and uneventful. I sat on the couch in the living room with the lights dimmed, the glow of the TV flickering across the room. The house was silent, except for the sound of the movie and the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. It was that kind of quiet where you almost start to notice things you never paid attention to before. The subtle hum of the refrigerator, the wind brushing against the windows, the distant bark of a dog down the street. Around 9 p.m., I heard it for the first time, a soft, almost imperceptible tapping at the front window. It was so faint, I thought maybe it was just a branch knocking against the glass. But when I paused the movie and stared at the window, I saw nothing. Just the dark porch, empty except for the usual patio furniture. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was nothing. I went back to watching the movie, but the feeling of being watched crept over me. I checked the locks on the doors out of habit. Everything was secure. I didn't have a phone signal on my cell in the living room, so I moved closer to the kitchen to get a bar. Then, just as the clock ticked past 10 p.m., the tapping came again, this time louder and more deliberate. It wasn't at the window anymore, but coming from the front door. 3 distinct knocks. I froze. It was unusual for anyone to come by this late, especially without calling ahead. I debated whether to look through the peephole. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my parents had told me not to open the door for strangers. But curiosity got the better of me. I tiptoed to the door and looked through the peephole. There was no one there. I stood there for a moment, the darkness outside undisturbed. I pulled the door tight and locked it again, feeling a cold prickle of anxiety run down my spine. I decided to turn on all the lights downstairs. The house felt too quiet, too empty, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than usual. I tried to shake off the unease and sat back down, trying to focus on the movie. But every sound made me jump. The wind picked up outside, rattling the window panes. Then came a faint scratching noise near the back door. I'm not ashamed to say I got up and peered out the kitchen window. Nothing, just the empty backyard, bathed in moonlight. I called my parents to check in, but their phones went straight to voicemail. I sent a quick text to my sister, who was out late and probably wouldn't see it until the morning. I even considered calling a neighbor, but didn't want to bother anyone. Around 11:15 p.m., the power flickered and went out. The house plunged into darkness. My heart was pounding. I fumbled for my phone to use as a flashlight, the weak glow barely illuminating the room. Then from the basement, I heard it, a low, slow creak, like footsteps on the wooden stairs. The basement door was just across the hall from me, a simple wooden door with a lock, but I had forgotten to lock it after getting a box of old Halloween decorations earlier that day. I told myself it was probably the house settling, or maybe a raccoon or stray animal that had gotten inside somehow. But the creaking continued, slow and deliberate, like someone was descending the stairs. I grabbed the nearest heavy object I could find, a metal flashlight, and cautiously approached the basement door. The house was silent except for my breathing and the faint scratching coming from below. I cracked the door open just enough to peek inside, but the basement was pitch black. The flashlight illuminated the first few steps, but nothing was there. Suddenly, a cold gust of air hit my face as if someone had just passed by, and the door slammed shut in my hand. I jumped back, nearly dropping the flashlight. My heart was racing uncontrollably. I yelled out, "Who's there?" But no answer, just silence. I ran back upstairs and locked all the doors and windows again, this time triple checking. I dialed 911, but the call didn't go through, something about poor signal. That's when the phone started ringing, my landline. I hesitated but answered. A crackling voice whispered on the other end, barely audible, "I'm inside." I slammed the receiver down, my hands shaking. I wasn't sure if it was a prank call or something worse. I grabbed my phone again, trying to get any kind of signal. Finally, a weak bar appeared. I dialed 911 again, and this time it connected. I told the dispatcher my address and the situation. They said officers were on the way and I should stay quiet and lock myself in a room. I ran to my bedroom upstairs, locked the door, and turned off the lights. I sat on the bed, clutching my phone, listening intently for any sounds. Minutes felt like hours. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps walking slowly up the stairs. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. The footsteps stopped just outside my door. The knob turned slowly, then stopped. I stayed frozen, heart pounding so loud I was sure whoever was there could hear it. After a long pause, the footsteps retreated back down the stairs. I didn't move until I heard the sirens approaching. The police arrived and swept the house. They found nothing, no sign of forced entry, and no one hiding. They told me it was probably someone messing around or maybe my imagination due to being alone. But I knew what I heard and saw. The next morning, my parents came back. I told them everything. They didn't believe the part about the phone call, but they agreed something felt off. Weeks later, the neighbors told me they had heard strange noises that night too. Footsteps, knocking, and weird scratching sounds, but no one saw anything. I moved out for college soon after and never stayed home alone again. Even now, when I'm alone at night, I check the locks twice and never ignore a knock at the door. Some nights, I still wonder who was really in that house. Story the end. It was a chilly November evening in a quiet suburb of Ohio when everything started to feel wrong. The leaves were thick on the ground, the kind that crunch underfoot with every step, and the sky had turned dark earlier than usual. I was 16 at the time, left home alone for the first weekend in months. My parents had gone out of town to attend a wedding, leaving me with strict instructions not to answer the door or talk to strangers. I was used to being alone. After all, I'd spent plenty of weekends by myself before. But that night, the silence in the house felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me. Around 7 p.m., I was sitting in the living room, headphones on, trying to study for my upcoming exams. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater kicking on every so often. The front door was locked tight. All the windows were closed and the blinds were drawn. I kept glancing at the clock, counting the hours until my parents were due back Sunday night. I told myself it would be fine. Then, just as I was about to get up and grab a snack, I heard it. A soft but deliberate tapping noise coming from the back window in the kitchen. It was rhythmic, like someone was lightly knocking on the glass. I froze, my heart thumping hard. There was no way it was a branch. The trees were still and the wind was barely a whisper. I slowly took off my headphones, straining to listen. The tapping stopped. I forced myself to look out the window, but the backyard was pitch black except for the faint glow of a streetlight far down the block. Nothing was there. I chalked it up to my imagination and went back to studying, but the unease didn't fade. About 20 minutes later, the tapping came again, this time from the side door window near the garage. It was sharper, more urgent. I pulled the curtain aside just a little and peered outside, but again, no one. I could see my own reflection staring back, wide-eyed. My hands trembled and I backed away. I wanted to call my parents, but I remembered my phone was almost dead and there was no charger in the living room. I moved slowly to the kitchen, grabbed my phone, and saw I had 1 bar of service. I dialed my mom's number, but got voicemail. I tried my dad, same thing. Panic started to rise. Suddenly the lights flickered and then went out altogether, plunging the house into darkness. My breath hitched, and I fumbled for the flashlight I kept in the junk drawer. Turning it on, I scanned the kitchen, the beam shaky in my hands. The tapping noise started again, this time from the living room window. I gripped the flashlight tighter and edged toward the hallway. I wanted to call 911, but I knew if someone was outside, I didn't want to give away my position by making noise. Then I heard footsteps, soft, slow footsteps coming from the back door. My blood ran cold. I ran upstairs to my bedroom, locked the door, and grabbed the baseball bat my dad kept under the bed. The footsteps were getting closer, the back door rattling as if someone was trying to open it. I backed into the corner of my room, barely breathing. My phone buzzed, a text message. Unknown number. I see you. I dropped the phone and clutched the bat, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The back door creaked open slowly. The footsteps moved inside. I heard a whisper, too faint to understand. I held the bat tight, ready to fight. The footsteps stopped right below my door. Then, nothing. Morning light finally broke through the window. I unlocked the door, raced downstairs, and found the back door wide open. The lock was broken, shattered glass on the floor. But the house was otherwise untouched. No sign of the intruder. The police came, took fingerprints, and told me they'd patrol the neighborhood. They found footprints leading into the backyard woods, but no suspects. My parents came home that afternoon. I told them everything. They installed new locks, an alarm system, and security cameras. The man never returned. But sometimes when I'm home alone and it gets quiet, I still hear the tapping. Story the end. The night I was left home alone is something I still think about sometimes, even years later. It was the fall of 2018, and I was 17, living with my parents and younger brother in a typical suburban neighborhood just outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My parents had planned a weekend getaway for their anniversary, leaving me alone in the house for the first time in years. My brother was staying with a friend, so I was the sole occupant of the 2-story house. At first, the idea excited me. No curfews, no one telling me what to do. But by the time night fell, that excitement had soured into something else entirely. That Friday, my parents left early in the afternoon. I made sure every door was locked, windows shut tight, and the alarm system was armed. The neighborhood was quiet, the sort of quiet that lulls you into a false sense of security. I told myself I'd just enjoy a low-key evening, some video games, maybe a horror movie marathon. I even ordered a pizza, which arrived around 7. The delivery guy was friendly, but seemed to glance around the neighborhood a little more than usual, which I brushed off. Maybe he was just tired. Around 9, after a few episodes of a show, I decided to turn in for the night. The house was dim, illuminated only by the soft glow of my laptop screen and a small lamp beside the couch. I could hear the faint hum of the heater struggling against the creeping cold outside. That's when the power went out. At first, I thought it was just a blip, but the darkness remained. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. The screen showed 45% battery. Not great, but enough to navigate. I moved cautiously toward the kitchen to find the flashlight I kept in the drawer, just in case. As I passed the back window, I caught movement, a shadow flickering between the thick bushes by the porch. I froze, heart pounding. The shadow vanished almost instantly, but the unease stuck. I locked the back door again, double-checked the windows. Everything was secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to call my parents, but there was no signal. The power outage seemed to have knocked out the cell towers in the area. I was alone, powerless in more ways than one. Then I heard it. Footsteps on the porch. Slow, deliberate. Someone was there. I moved toward the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the lock. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then a soft scrape. Someone was trying to open the door. I remembered the baseball bat my dad kept in the hall closet. I grabbed it, clutching it tightly as I retreated to the living room where the front windows offered a view of the street. The porch light flickered weakly, casting long, shifting shadows. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to calm my racing heart. The door handle rattled, then stopped. Footsteps moved away, crunching on the gravel driveway. I waited. Minutes passed. I wanted to call the police, but the signal was still down. I turned off the lights and hid in the closet, bat in hand. Hours passed in silence. Then, just before dawn, the power came back on. I crept outside to check. The back door was unlocked. There were footprints in the wet grass, leading from the bushes around the side of the house to the back porch. Later, I found out that a man had been arrested a few blocks away, accused of breaking into homes during power outages. He'd been watching houses, waiting for the perfect moment. I never forgot that night. The terrifying silence, the feeling of being helpless, and the cold grip of fear that came from knowing someone had been so close. Story the end. The night my parents left for a weekend trip to visit family in Chicago, I was left alone in the house for the first time in years. I was 17, a senior in high school, and had been looking forward to some quiet time to myself. My younger brother was at a friend's house for a sleepover, so it was just me in our two-story suburban home on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio. The house was a typical middle-class home from the early 90s, nothing fancy but comfortable. My parents always insisted on locking every door and window before leaving, so I figured everything would be fine. The first few hours were uneventful. I ordered a pizza, watched some TV, and played video games, trying to enjoy the freedom of being home alone. But as the clock passed 10 p.m., the atmosphere in the house started to feel different. The usual creaks and groans of the settling house became louder and more frequent. The wind outside rattled the window panes, and shadows cast by the streetlight outside stretched eerily across the living room floor. I tried not to let myself feel nervous. After all, I'd been in this house countless times before. Still, there was that little voice in my head urging me to be cautious. I checked all the locks again, front door, back door, windows, and everything was secure. I felt a bit silly for being so paranoid. About 11:15 p.m., the power flickered once, then went out completely. The house plunged into darkness, save for the dim orange glow of the street lamp filtering through the curtains. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight app. My battery was at about 45%, so I needed to be careful. The first thing I did was check the breaker box in the basement. The panel looked fine, no tripped switches. The outage seemed to be affecting the whole neighborhood. As I was heading back upstairs, I heard a creaking noise coming from the hallway. It was faint, but distinct, like footsteps on the hardwood floor above me. I froze, flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound stopped almost immediately, but I was certain someone was up there. I remembered the attic door in the hallway closet was supposed to be locked, but I hadn't checked it lately. I debated whether to call my parents or the police. Maybe it was just the wind or an animal on the roof, but my gut told me otherwise. I kept the flashlight close and tiptoed upstairs. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. The house felt larger in the dark, shadows looming at the edges of the beam. In the hallway, I paused and listened carefully. Nothing. I turned toward my bedroom, but caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The closet door at the end of the hall had swung open an inch. The old brass knob glinted in the light. My breath caught. The closet wasn't supposed to be open. I backed away slowly and decided I needed to get out of the house. I grabbed my keys, phone, and jacket, then headed for the front door. As I reached for the handle, I heard footsteps behind me, soft, deliberate, coming from the stairs. I didn't turn around. I fumbled with the door lock, my fingers shaking so badly I struggled to get it open. Once the door finally swung wide, I bolted down the porch steps and into the street. I ran barefoot, my heart pounding, front until I reached the neighbor's house across the street. Mrs. Henderson answered the door, startled to see me so late. "There's someone in my house," I gasped. "I think someone's in my house." She let me in and called 911 immediately. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers entered the house with flashlights and guns drawn, sweeping every room. I waited in the neighbor's living room, my nerves raw, listening to their radio chatter and footsteps. After about 10 minutes, one officer returned. "We didn't find anyone inside," he said, voice low. "But your bookshelf in the living room was knocked over. Looks like something heavy fell." I was confused. The bookshelf was exactly where I had left it earlier that evening. I hadn't heard it fall. The officer explained they found footprints in the backyard. Fresh, large, leading toward the house. None leading away. Looks like whoever it was came in the backyard but didn't leave the way they came. The thought made my skin crawl. I asked if they had checked the attic. They said no, but would once the power was back on. I stayed at Mrs. Henderson's that night. I couldn't sleep, haunted by the sounds and the shadow in the hallway. When my parents returned the next day, I told them everything. They were upset, but tried to stay calm. They hired a locksmith to upgrade all the locks and installed new security cameras the following week. About a month later, I heard on the news that a man was arrested in the neighborhood for multiple break-ins. He had been living in one of the vacant houses nearby. Police suspected he was also breaking into occupied homes at night. No one knew how long he had been lurking, watching, waiting. I still can't explain the noises or the open closet door. I wonder if he ever got inside the attic or any other part of the house. Every time I'm home alone now, especially at night, I check the locks twice, make sure every door and window is secure, and I never ignore that little voice telling me something's not right. Story the end. It was the first weekend in November, and my parents were out of town for a long weekend, something they'd been planning for months. I was 22, still living at home while working a part-time job and attending community college nearby. This was my first real stretch alone in the house without any siblings or roommates. They left Friday morning around 9 a.m., and I waved them off, feeling both excited and a little uneasy about having the entire place to myself. The house was a typical mid-century suburban split level in a quiet neighborhood in Ohio. Not exactly a fancy place, but comfortable. The street was lined with similar homes, all with those familiar orange streetlights and the occasional sound of a car passing by late at night. My parents made sure everything was locked up tight before they left, windows, doors, even the garage, and I followed their routine. Double-checked every lock twice before settling in. That Friday night, I was doing homework in my room, the soft glow of my laptop screen filling the dark corners. I had my headphones on, listening to a podcast about unsolved mysteries. Around 11 p.m., I decided to take a break and get some water. The kitchen was just down the hall. As I passed the living room, I noticed the large front window curtains were slightly parted on one side, which was odd since I remembered closing them earlier. I shrugged it off, telling myself I must have missed it. The backyard was dark, but the streetlight outside cast long shadows across the lawn. I poured a glass of water, then froze when I thought I heard the faintest sound of someone whispering. It was so soft I couldn't be sure. I stood still, listening, but the house was silent again. I turned on the kitchen light and checked the back door, locked tight. I peeked through the blinds, scanning the yard and the street beyond. Nothing. No cars, no people. The quiet was almost eerie, but nothing seemed out of place. I went back to my room and closed the curtains this time, making sure they were fully shut. Then I sat down again to keep working. About an hour later, I started hearing noises that made my heart pound. First, a scraping sound, like nails or claws dragging against wood, coming from the side of the house, near the garage. It was faint, but unmistakable. I stopped typing and held my breath, straining to listen. The sound repeated a few times, slow and deliberate, then stopped altogether. I debated calling my parents, but their phones went straight to voicemail, probably in an airport or on a plane. My own phone battery was at 20%, so I didn't want to use it up unless necessary. I grabbed the flashlight from the hall closet and crept downstairs. The living room was dark, except for the streetlight filtering through the front window. The side door that led to the garage was closed, but I moved toward it cautiously. The scratching noise had come from somewhere near the bottom of the door. I crouched and shined the flashlight down, and my stomach dropped. There, smeared on the wood near the threshold, were faint streaks of what looked like dirt, or maybe dried blood. I didn't want to think about it. I quickly shut the door and locked it again, my hands trembling. I returned upstairs and locked my bedroom door, then slid the deadbolt shut. I told myself it was probably a raccoon or a neighborhood stray cat scratching at the door, but the blood-like smears didn't make sense. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I was woken by the sound of glass breaking downstairs. My heart jumped into my throat. I sat up, clutching my phone, and turned on my bedroom light. The front window? No, the sliding glass door in the back of the house. That was the only place with a glass door besides the front. I quietly slid out of bed and moved toward the door, the hallway dim and shadowy. As I passed my parents' room, I noticed the door was cracked open. Strange, since it was always shut at night. The house felt suddenly cold. I paused, listening. From downstairs, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy on the wooden floor. Someone was inside the house. I ran to my bedroom, locked the door again, and grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed. My phone was almost dead. I called 911 with trembling hands. The dispatcher asked for my address and told me to stay calm and quiet until officers arrived. I turned off the lights and sat on the floor near the door, bat in hand, heart hammering in my chest. Minutes passed like hours. Then I heard footsteps climbing the stairs. The slow creak of the steps getting closer. I held my breath, gripping the bat tightly. At the door, a shadow appeared, a figure looming just outside the doorframe. Then a whisper. "Just come out. I'm not going to hurt you." The voice was low, raspy, barely audible. I shook my head silently, gripping the bat harder. The footsteps retreated slowly, fading back down the stairs. Then silence. Suddenly a loud pounding on the front door. The police. Relief flooded me. I screamed, "I'm here! It's me!" They broke in quickly, flashlights sweeping the rooms. The intruder was gone. They searched every corner of the house, found no signs of forced entry, except the broken glass on the sliding door, which had been smashed from the outside. The police found footprints in the backyard, large, muddy prints leading into the woods behind the house. They told me to stay with a friend or family member until my parents returned. I spent the rest of the night at my best friend's house, still shaking, replaying every sound and shadow in my mind. The next day, the police increased patrols in the neighborhood. Neighbors reported seeing a man in dark clothes lurking near other homes that week. No one was caught. I never forgot the terror of being home alone, vulnerable, and hunted in what should have been the safest place in the world. To this day, I sleep with the lights on and the doors locked tight. Story the end. I remember the night vividly. It was late October, the kind of night where the chill creeps into your bones and the wind howls through the trees. I was 17, living with my parents in a modest 2-story suburban home in a quiet neighborhood of Portland, Oregon. My parents had to make a last-minute trip out of town to attend a family emergency, and I was left alone for the weekend. It wasn't my first time home alone, but it was the first time I felt a creeping unease I couldn't shake. They left early Friday afternoon, and I waved them off with a casual smile, assuring them I'd be fine. My sister was away at college, so the house was mine. At first, I planned to binge-watch shows, order pizza, and enjoy the freedom of no parental supervision. But as night fell, the silence in the house settled heavy and thick. Around 8 p.m., after a quick dinner and some homework, I decided to call it a night. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and settled in my room with a book and my laptop. Milo, our orange tabby cat, curled up next to me, purring softly. I thought about texting my girlfriend Jenna, but decided to save it for later. About 9:30, I heard a faint thud from downstairs. It was soft, like the sound of something falling or someone dropping a small object. I paused my reading and listened. Milo perked up, ears twitching. I chalked it up to the old house settling, or maybe Milo knocking something over, and tried to focus back on my book. But then I heard it again, a quiet scraping noise, like dragging. It was coming from the kitchen. I froze. The kitchen was on the first floor, directly below my room. I called out softly, "Hello?" but got no response. Milo hissed and darted toward my bedroom door, tail puffed up. My heart was pounding as I grabbed my phone to call my parents, but the signal was weak. No bars. I tried again, but it cut off. A cold wave of panic washed over me. I stuffed the phone in my pocket and grabbed the flashlight from my desk. Slowly, I crept downstairs, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The kitchen was just as I left it, the sink full of clean dishes, the fridge humming. But the pantry door was slightly ajar, which I was sure I'd closed tight. I stepped closer, the wooden floor creaking beneath my feet. The door swung open with a slight push, revealing nothing but the rows of canned goods and boxes. I sighed in relief, shaking my head at my imagination. Then I heard it again, a soft whisper, almost like a breath. My blood ran cold. I turned sharply toward the back door. It led to the fenced backyard. It should have been locked. I double-checked. The lock was undone. My breath caught in my throat. I gripped the flashlight tighter and pulled out my phone again. Still no signal. From somewhere in the dark beyond the door, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate. They crunched softly on the gravel patio. "Who's there?" I demanded, voice shaking. No answer. I backed away slowly, heart thudding, and bolted upstairs, locking the door behind me. I called 911 from my bedroom, whispering everything I could. The operator told me officers were dispatched but might take time to arrive. Then came a pounding on the front door. Heavy, forceful. The kind that didn't ask to be let in, but demanded entry. I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed and crept toward the landing. The lights flickered, then went out. Total darkness. Milo screamed from down the hall. My phone's flashlight barely pierced the gloom as I looked down the stairs. Footsteps on the porch. More pounding. Then, silence. Suddenly, a window shattered downstairs. I dropped the bat and raced to the door, but it was too late. The screen door rattled as the intruder slipped inside. I locked myself in my room, heart racing so hard it hurt. Minutes later, the front door slammed open and shut, then quiet. I stayed in my room, locked and barricaded until I heard the sirens. The police searched the house but found no one. They later told me he'd probably been watching the house for days, waiting for my parents to leave. I never felt safe there again. Sometimes I still hear footsteps outside at night. Story the end. It was late October in a quiet suburb of Ohio, the kind of night where the wind pressed cold and sharp against the windows, rattling the blinds just enough to make shadows dance on the walls. I was 17 and home alone for the first time overnight. My parents had left early that evening for a business trip in another state and wouldn't be back until late the next night. They'd left me with a list of instructions. Lock every door and window, don't answer the phone or the door for anyone, keep all the lights on downstairs until I went to bed, and text them every couple of hours. At first, everything was normal. I ate dinner alone, watched some TV, and checked my phone every few minutes to tell them I was fine. The house felt too big and empty, but I told myself it was just the quiet and the absence of people. I went through my usual routine. Shower, brush my teeth, set out my clothes for the next day. Around 10:30 p.m., I started to wind down. I turned off the TV, left the living room light on, and headed upstairs to my bedroom. The house creaked a little as it settled, and the wind outside made the gutters drip rhythmically. I texted my mom again, telling her I was about to go to bed. Just as I was about to crawl under the covers, I heard a faint sound downstairs, a soft thud like something hitting the floor. I froze. The house was supposed to be empty except for me. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, or maybe something falling over in the basement. I called out, "Hello?" but got no response. I grabbed my phone and tiptoed to my bedroom door. The hallway was dark except for the faint glow from the nightlight in the bathroom. The creaking came again, louder this time, coming from the stairs. I stood very still, listening. Then from downstairs I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, heavy footsteps moving toward the front door. My heart pounded in my chest. I dialed 911 but hung up immediately, worried that if whoever was down there heard me, they'd know I was calling for help. I texted my parents. Someone's in the house. I'm hiding in my room. The footsteps stopped at the front door. I could hear breathing, heavy, ragged breaths. Then a low, rough voice whispered, "I know you're in there. Just come out." I didn't move. I slid under my bed and pulled the covers over me. My phone vibrated. A text from my dad, "Call 911. Stay quiet. Police are on their way." The footsteps moved away from the front door and toward the living room. I could hear someone rummaging through drawers, opening and closing cabinets. I wanted to scream, but I swallowed hard. After what felt like forever, the footsteps went back toward the front door. I heard the door open and close softly, and the sound of a car speeding away. I waited another half hour before daring to get out from under the bed. When the police arrived, they found no signs of forced entry, but the lock on the front door was scratched deeply, like someone had tried to jimmy it open. They found muddy footprints on the porch and some torn fabric caught on a nail near the door. I never forgot that night. I learned to always trust my instincts and never take the safety of my home for granted. Even now, years later, when I'm alone at night, I can still hear those footsteps echoing through the quiet house. Story the end. It was late October, a Friday night just after Halloween, when I found myself home alone in my family's suburban house in Ohio. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend to attend a wedding several hours away, and my older brother was staying with friends. I was 17, more than old enough to handle things by myself, or so I thought. I had the whole house to myself, and after a long week of school, I was looking forward to the freedom and quiet. The house was a typical two-story brick front home built in the late 80s, with a large backyard fenced in by tall wooden panels. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly families and retirees. The streetlights blinked on in a steady rhythm as dusk gave way to night, and the occasional car passed by slowly. I had already checked every door and window before my parents left that morning. All locked tight. The evening started normally enough. I made myself a sandwich, binge-watched some YouTube videos, and later decided to take a shower before bed. Around 10:30 p.m., I climbed into the bathtub and let the warm water wash away the tension of the day. The house was quiet except for the running water and the occasional creak of the old pipes. After the shower, I changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt, then sat down in the living room with my phone and a bag of popcorn. I was scrolling through messages and watching TV when suddenly the power blinked. The lights flickered and went out for a moment, then came back on. Nothing unusual in itself. Our neighborhood sometimes experienced brief outages, especially in the fall during windy nights. I didn't think much of it, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the living room window was dark, too dark. The curtains weren't drawn all the way, and I could see the yard, but it looked like someone was standing outside. I froze and stared at the window. At first, I thought it might be a trick of the shadows or the trees swaying in the wind. But then a movement, a faint outline of a person standing just beyond the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I blinked. The figure was still there. I immediately jumped up and went to the window, pulling the curtain closed quickly. I didn't want to confront whatever it was outside, but I couldn't just ignore it either. I locked the window, even though it was already locked, and double-checked all the doors. I called my parents, but there was no answer on their phones. No surprise, they were at the wedding reception, probably having fun. My brother's phone went straight to voicemail. It was just me and the house. Trying to calm myself down, I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. The kitchen window faced the backyard, so I looked out carefully. The yard was empty. No cars, no people. I texted my best friend Sarah, who lived about 15 minutes away, and told her what happened. She told me to stay calm and promised to check in on me later. I turned on all the lights in the house and sat back down on the couch, trying to distract myself. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. About 20 minutes later, I heard it. A soft tapping at the front door. My heart thudded so hard I thought it would burst through my chest. I crept towards the door and peeked through the peephole. Nobody. I looked outside both ways down the street. Empty. Nothing but the occasional rustling of leaves. I backed away from the door, relieved but still uneasy. Then I heard it again. Tapping. this time louder. I grabbed my phone, ready to dial 911 if needed, and slowly opened the door just a crack. No one. But on the welcome mat, there was a small, folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I picked it up and unfolded it. Written in messy black ink were the words, "I see you." A cold wave swept over me. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and immediately called 911. The dispatcher was calm, asking me for my address and what was going on. I told her about the figure outside the window, the knocking, and the note. She said officers were on their way and advised me to stay inside, keep all doors locked, and not answer the door for anyone I didn't know. I sat on the floor in the corner of the living room, phone pressed to my ear, waiting. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. 2 officers walked through the house, checking every room, every window, and even the backyard. They didn't find any signs of forced entry or anyone lurking around. The note was taken as evidence, and the officers assured me they would patrol the neighborhood more frequently that night. After they left, I locked every door and window again and sat in the living room with the lights on until dawn. I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every shadow seemed amplified. I kept checking the windows, but saw nothing. When my parents returned the next day, I told them everything. They were worried and immediately installed a new security system with cameras around the house. In the following weeks, nothing unusual happened. No figures at the window, no notes. But the feeling stayed with me that someone had been watching, waiting, and maybe even knew I was alone. Months later, I found out from a neighbor that there had been a string of break-ins in nearby neighborhoods, mostly on nights when the houses were empty. But I never found out who left that note or stood outside my window. Sometimes, when I'm home alone late at night, I still double-check the locks and glance nervously out the windows, wondering if the watcher might come back. Story the end. It was a typical Friday night in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio where I lived with my parents. They had gone out of town to visit family for the weekend, and I was left alone in the house for the first time. I was 19, a college student back home for the summer, and I had insisted on staying alone to enjoy some privacy and independence. My parents trusted me, but they were still a little nervous, reminding me repeatedly to lock all the doors and windows, keep my phone charged, and not answer the door to strangers. I thought I had everything under control. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself, watched some TV, and chatted with friends online. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creaks from the old wooden floors. I had set up a small fan in my bedroom because it was warm for early June, and I had left a window cracked open to let in the night air. Around 10:30 p.m., I settled on the couch with a book. The only light was a dim lamp near the armchair and the soft glow from the street lamp outside through the living room window. The house felt calm, almost too calm, but I reminded myself it was just the normal silence of being home alone at night. About an hour later, I was halfway through a chapter when I heard a noise that made me freeze. It was a faint tapping sound coming from the back door. I thought maybe a branch was hitting the glass or the neighbor's cat was out in the yard. I got up and looked out the window. The backyard was dark except for the faint outline of the trees and the fence. Nothing seemed out of place. I went to the back door and checked the lock. It was secure. The tapping stopped. I shook off the unease and went back to my book. But the tapping returned, louder this time, 3 sharp knocks. My heart rate quickened. Who would be knocking at this hour? I moved slowly to the door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch light flickered faintly, but no one stood there. I was about to turn away when I noticed something on the porch floor, a small crumpled piece of paper. I picked it up, my hands trembling slightly, and unfolded it carefully. The note read, "I see you." A cold wave swept over me. I scanned the yard again, flashlight app ready on my phone, but the yard was empty. I locked the door again, double-checked all the windows, and turned on every light in the house. I called my mom, who answered groggily. "Mom, someone left a note on the porch. It says, 'I see you.' What do I do?" She told me to call the police immediately and not to leave the house. I dialed 911. The dispatcher was calm and said they would send an officer to check the area. I paced nervously, trying to stay calm. The officer arrived about 20 minutes later. Eli, a tall man in his 40s with a reassuring voice. He checked the yard, walked around the house, and talked with me for a bit. He found no footprints or evidence anyone had been near the house except for the neighbors' cats and raccoons. "We'll keep an eye out," he said, "but you're safe inside. Lock everything, and call us if you see anything else." I thanked him and watched as his patrol car disappeared down the street. Despite his reassurances, I felt uneasy. The rest of the night dragged on. I didn't hear anything else at first, just the usual noises of the house settling. Around 2 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth. I grabbed my phone and flashlight, turning on every possible light inside the house. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard the doorbell ring twice in quick succession. I didn't answer. I went to the window and saw a shadow near the front door. I couldn't make out the face, but I saw the figure step back into the shadows and disappear. I locked every door and window again, sliding the bolt locks into place. Suddenly, the power went out. The house was plunged into darkness, and the silence became overwhelming. I turned on my phone's flashlight and moved to the living room window, peering out into the yard. Nothing. The streetlights were off too. My phone lost signal. No calls, no texts. Then the knocking started again. This time, it wasn't on the door, but on the windows. Soft at first, then louder, more insistent. I was trapped in my own home, cut off from help. The knocking stopped suddenly, replaced by a faint whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it sounded close, right outside the window. Panic took hold, and I ran to the basement door, hoping for a back exit. The door was unlocked. I opened it slowly and peeked into the darkness. The basement was empty. I backed away, heart pounding, and heard something behind me, a soft, slow creak from the hallway. I spun around and saw the silhouette of a man in the faint glow of my phone light. His face was obscured by a hood, and he didn't move. I screamed, and he stepped forward. I stumbled backward, falling into a chair and grabbing a heavy lamp. I swung it at him as he lunged. He vanished. I blinked, and he was gone. The lights flickered back on, and the power was restored. I ran outside and yelled for help. Neighbors came out with their phones and flashlights. The police arrived minutes later, sweeping the area and searching the house. No one was found. In the morning, my parents returned. They comforted me, but were visibly shaken when they saw the note I had kept. The police told me this was probably some disturbed person watching the house, but they never found any leads. I never stayed home alone again. Story the end. It was a chilly October evening when my parents left town for the weekend, leaving me alone in our suburban home for the first time in years. I was 22, a college student home for fall break, and while I'd spent plenty of nights alone before, this felt different. Maybe it was because the house was bigger, or maybe because my parents were usually here when I was home. But that night, I was truly on my own. The day went by like any other. I ran errands, cleaned the house, and cooked a simple dinner for myself. The neighborhood was quiet, the leaves rustling in the crisp autumn wind, and the street lamps flickered on just as the sun dipped below the horizon. I felt a small thrill. This was my first real chance to be independent, and I was looking forward to the weekend. After dinner, I settled on the couch with some homework and a cup of tea. The house creaked as it always did in the evenings, the sound amplified by the silence. I tried not to think about how empty it was without my parents. The clock ticked past 9 p.m., then 10, and the quiet around the house deepened. Around 10:30, I heard a faint knock at the front door. It was soft, hesitant, almost polite. I paused my homework and listened. Knock. Knock. My heart jumped. Who could be visiting this late? I wasn't expecting anyone, and honestly, I wasn't in the mood for company. I peeked through the peephole but saw nothing, just the dimly lit porch and the empty street. I called out, "Who is it?" No answer. Another knock, louder this time. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I opened the door a crack, just enough to see outside without letting anyone in. The porch was empty. I stepped outside and looked down the street. Not a soul. The street lamp flickered above me, casting an eerie glow over the empty road. The wind picked up, scattering dead leaves at my feet. The silence was thick, too thick. I closed the door and locked it firmly. Back inside, I checked all the locks again. The deadbolt was secure. Windows shut tight. My mind raced, trying to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it was a prank or someone knocking on the wrong door. I tried to shake off the unease and return to the living room. My heart was still pounding, though. About 20 minutes later, the knock came again, but this time from the back door. My stomach dropped. The back door was a glass sliding door that led to the backyard. I rarely used it at night, mostly because the yard was dark and uninviting. I tiptoed over and looked through the curtains. Nothing. No movement, just the faint outline of the trees swaying in the wind. I pulled the curtains closed and locked the door. I wanted to call my parents or a friend, but I hesitated. What if I was overreacting? What if it was nothing? Still, the tension in the house was growing. Later that night, around midnight, I was lying in bed when I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from the attic. Our house was old, and sometimes noises from the attic filtered down, but this sounded different, deliberate. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a squirrel. But then the scratching turned into tapping, rhythmic and steady. I grabbed my phone and flipped on the flashlight app, creeping toward the attic door in the hallway. The door was old wood with a rusty latch. My hands trembled as I reached out to open it. As the door creaked open, the tapping stopped abruptly. Silence. I shone my flashlight into the dark space beyond. Just the usual stored boxes and some old furniture. No animals, no intruders. I closed the door and backed away, breathing heavily. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a text message. I fumbled to check it. It was from an unknown number. I'm inside. My breath caught in my throat. I locked my phone and ran to the front door, checking the locks again. Everything was locked. I called 911, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. The dispatcher told me officers were on their way and to stay put. Minutes later, blue and red lights flashed outside. 2 police officers entered the house and began searching. They checked the basement, the closets, every room. No one. No signs of forced entry. Nothing. One of the officers suggested it might have been a prank, but I knew better. I sat on the couch, clutching my phone, eyes darting to every shadow. The officers stayed until dawn, then left with reassurances that they would patrol the area. My parents came home the next morning, tired but relieved. They hugged me tightly, promising to install a security system. Even weeks later, I'd catch myself jumping at noises, the tapping on windows, the scratching from the attic. I never found out who sent that message or who was knocking at my doors that night. Sometimes I think maybe it wasn't a person at all. Maybe it was something else. Story the end. The night started like any other ordinary night for me, but by the time it was over, I wouldn't be able to forget what happened for as long as I lived. It was a chilly November evening in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio. My parents had left town for the weekend to attend a conference, and I was home alone. I was 18 and in college, so it wasn't the first time I had the house to myself, but something about this night felt different from the very beginning. I remember locking the door behind my parents as they got into their car early that afternoon. They gave me their usual reminders: lock the doors, don't open the door for strangers, call them if anything felt off. I smiled and nodded. I was confident, maybe even a little too confident, that I could handle everything on my own. The house was a standard 2-story with a driveway, a garage, and a fenced backyard. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other and you never really locked your doors during the day. But at night, it could get eerie. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the occasional rustle of wind made the trees seem alive. Around 7 o'clock, I was finishing dinner, just some frozen lasagna I'd thrown in the oven, and I turned on the TV to catch the evening news. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. My best friend Jake had texted me earlier, and we joked about the big game coming up on Sunday. I was sitting on the couch when I heard it, a soft noise coming from the front porch. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe a branch brushing against the window. But then there was a distinct tapping on the glass by the front door. Slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. I glanced at the clock. 7:15 p.m. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I told myself it was probably just a delivery I hadn't heard the doorbell for, or maybe the neighbor's kid messing around. I stood up and went to the window to peek through the blinds. The street was empty and dark except for the faint glow from the streetlight across the road. No one in sight. I unlocked the deadbolt on the front door just to make sure it was secure, probably more out of habit than anything else. The tapping continued for a few more seconds before stopping altogether. Trying to shake the uneasy feeling, I locked the door again and went back to the living room. That's when I noticed my phone buzzing. It was Jake again. "Everything good?" his text read. I typed back, "Yeah, just heard some weird tapping at the door. Probably nothing." The minutes ticked by uneventfully. I went upstairs to my room to finish some homework, shutting my bedroom door behind me. I always locked it when I was alone, just in case. My parents drilled it into me since I was a kid. About an hour later, as I was reviewing notes for a biology exam, I heard a faint creaking noise outside my bedroom window. The curtains fluttered slightly. I froze. I stayed perfectly still and strained to listen. It sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing back and forth across the porch. I texted Jake again. "I think someone's outside. Call the cops, please." He replied almost immediately, "On it. Stay safe." I grabbed my phone and sat on my bed, trying not to panic. I kept the door locked and the blinds shut tight. Suddenly, a low, guttural voice whispered from the front porch, barely audible but clear enough to send chills down my spine. "Let me in." I shook, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I tried calling 911, but my phone suddenly lost signal. The screen went black. I frantically turned it on and off. No signal. No calls could be made. I remembered the old landline in the kitchen and sprinted downstairs, keeping close to the wall, careful to avoid making noise. The porch light flickered overhead, casting long, ominous shadows. I picked up the receiver, but the line was dead. I slammed the receiver down and heard the front door handle jiggle. "Please," the voice whispered again. I ran to the back door and locked it. That's when I noticed the sliding glass door leading to the backyard was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it earlier. My mind raced. Someone had to be inside the house. I backed away slowly, my hands trembling, and grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find. It was a dull blade, but better than nothing. The footsteps started moving inside the house, slow but deliberate. I ran to the stairs and bolted to my room, locking the door behind me. My phone buzzed once more with a message from Jake. I called 911. They're on their way. Stay calm. I dialed 911 again, holding the line open. The dispatcher answered, and I whispered my address and situation. "Help is coming," she said firmly. Suddenly, the bedroom door handle rattled violently. I backed into the corner, clutching the knife like it was a lifeline. The handle stopped. A silence so thick I could hear my own breathing filled the room. Then a low scratching sound came from outside the window. I turned and shone my flashlight towards the glass. A shadow passed quickly. The window was locked, but I felt utterly trapped. I stayed in the closet until I heard the distant sound of sirens. The footsteps abruptly stopped. The front door burst open, and 2 officers entered the house. I ran out, tears streaming down my face. They found a man hiding in the bushes near the backyard, filthy and armed with a crowbar. He was arrested on the spot. The officers told me he had been watching the house for days, waiting for an opportunity. I spent the rest of the night at the neighbor's house, unable to shake the feeling of vulnerability. For weeks after, I checked every door and window twice before bed. I never stayed home alone again. Story the end. The night my parents left town, I thought it would be just like any other night alone. I was 17, and they'd gone for a weekend trip to visit my grandparents, leaving me with the house to myself. It was early October, the kind of chilly night when the wind rustled dry leaves down the street and the streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalks. Our house sat on a quiet suburban cul-de-sac in Pennsylvania. Typical American suburbia, neat lawns, kids' vazat, bicycles chained up, porch lights flickering here and there. My parents trusted me to stay inside, locked up, and I wasn't one to get in trouble. I'd spent plenty of nights home alone before, but something about that night was different. The air had a strange stillness to it, like the world was holding its breath. I had finished dinner around 7:30, microwaving some leftover pasta and scrolling through social media. The house was silent, except for the low hum of the fridge and the occasional creak from settling wood. I flicked on the TV and flipped through channels, but wasn't really paying attention. I felt an itch to check the locks again, so I went around the house touching each door and window. All secured. Around 9 p.m., the power flickered once and the lights dimmed briefly, but everything came back on quickly. I shrugged it off, but it set a slight edge to the night. About an hour later, I was on the couch watching a documentary when the phone rang. It was the landline, which was unusual because almost everyone had cell phones. I glanced at the caller ID, no name, just a string of numbers I didn't recognize. I debated whether to answer it, but figured it might be a wrong number. It stopped ringing before I could reach it. Then the phone rang again. This time I picked up. Hello? Static. Then a faint, whispery breath. My heart jumped. I said, "Who is this?" Silence. I hung up, trying to convince myself it was just some prank caller. Trying to distract myself, I grabbed my phone to text my sister, who was spending the night at a friend's house. As I typed, the lights flickered again, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed the room. I scrambled for my phone to use as a flashlight. The battery was low. The house was utterly silent, except for the faint buzz of the cellular signal. Suddenly, I heard it. A soft tapping. Not at the front door, but at the back window. My blood ran cold. I peeked through the curtains. Nothing. Just the swaying branches of the maple tree, bathed in moonlight. Then, tapping again, this time on the kitchen door that led to the backyard. I backed away slowly and locked the door. My fingers trembled as I dialed 911 on my cell. The call wouldn't connect. I tried again. No signal. I decided to call my parents, but the calls went straight to voicemail. I was completely cut off. That's when I heard the basement door creak open downstairs. Our basement door was old, made of wood with a rusty knob. It had a loud squeak when it moved. I froze. I knew for sure I'd closed and locked it earlier. The scratching noises started, like fingernails dragging across the concrete basement stairs. My mind raced. Could someone be inside the house? I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and slowly made my way toward the basement door. The air felt colder, the silence heavier. I peered down the dark stairwell, shining my phone light, but saw nothing. Then the light flickered on in the basement. An old bare bulb hanging from the ceiling illuminated the empty room. I heard a faint whisper, so low I almost missed it. "Get out!" My heart pounded so loud I thought the intruder might hear it. I backed away quickly and locked the door. The front doorbell rang repeatedly. I jumped. Who could it be? I didn't dare go to the door. I grabbed my phone again and tried the emergency number once more. This time, I got through. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my house, I whispered, voice shaking. The basement doors open and the line went dead. I tried to call back, but no signal again. Suddenly, the back door slammed. I ran to the window, looked outside. Nothing but darkness. The phone rang again, the landline. I answered it, breathing hard. This time, a deep voice whispered, "You can't hide." I screamed and slammed the receiver down. I ran upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom, hiding under the covers with my phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the police. Minutes dragged by. Finally, I heard the sound of sirens. I ran to the window, saw flashing lights in the driveway. The cops burst in and swept the house. No signs of forced entry. No intruder found. They said it might have been a prank call. Maybe a burglar scared off by the lights. But I knew someone was there that night. My parents returned in the morning. I told them everything. They didn't believe the voice on the phone, but agreed the basement door was unlocked, which had never happened before. I moved out shortly after that. I never wanted to be alone in that house at night again. Sometimes I still hear tapping when I'm alone, and sometimes I wonder if they're still there. Story the end. It was early October in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where the streets were lined with aging maple trees whose leaves were just starting to turn red and gold. The nights were getting colder, and the sunset crept in earlier every day. I was 17 and had spent many weekends home alone before. My parents often worked late or took trips, and honestly, I was comfortable with the house to myself. But the night this story centers on was different. It was the night I realized just how fragile that feeling of safety could be. My parents had left Friday morning to attend a wedding out of state. They told me they'd be back Sunday afternoon. My little brother was with my grandparents for the weekend, so the house was completely empty except for me. I'd planned to spend most of the weekend studying for my senior year exams, but that evening I was trying to relax a little. By 7:30 p.m., I was in the living room, sitting on the couch, half watching a movie on the TV. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the furnace and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors settling. The front porch light was on, casting a yellow glow across the driveway. I had closed all the blinds, but the windows reflected the dim room inside. Nothing outside, no cars, no people, just the usual suburban silence. At around 8:15, I was getting ready to grab a snack in the kitchen when I heard a noise at the back door, a soft tapping like fingers lightly drumming against the glass. My heart jumped. I paused, listening intently. The house was still otherwise. I hesitated, but walked over to the kitchen window that looked out onto the backyard. It was dark except for the faint glow of the neighbor's porch light a few houses down. I couldn't see anything. No shadows, no movement. I closed the curtains and shrugged it off as a branch brushing against the glass in the wind. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in my chest. About 15 minutes later, I heard it again, this time louder, more insistent, a slow but steady tapping at the side window near the garage. I froze, every muscle tense. The side yard was narrower and less visible from the street. I crept over to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to peer out. There was nothing. No one. But then movement in the shadows caught my eye. A figure standing just beyond the reach of the porch light, barely visible. A man, tall, wearing a dark hoodie, face obscured by shadows. He wasn't moving much, but he was definitely there, watching. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back from the window, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. My mind raced. Was he trying to break in? Was he waiting for me to open the door? I considered calling my parents, but my phone was dead from a day of heavy use. The landline was in the living room, but I didn't want to take my eyes off the window. The man suddenly moved forward a few steps toward the garage door. I heard the faintest sound of scraping, like a metal tool being dragged slowly along the edge of the door. I swallowed hard and felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Without thinking, I ran upstairs to my room, locked the door, grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed, and pressed my ear to the door. From below, I could hear the scrape again, louder this time, then soft footsteps, deliberate, slow, approaching the back stairs. I held my breath. The doorknob rattled once, then silence. My phone buzzed suddenly. I jumped, clutching the bat tightly. I pulled out my phone and saw a text message from an unknown number. I see you. My fingers trembled as I stared at the screen. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay calm. I texted back, "Who is this?" No reply. The doorknob rattled again. Then heavy footsteps creaked the stairs, getting closer. I backed away from the door, heart in my throat, and crouched down behind my dresser. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I gripped the bat, ready to defend myself. A soft, almost whispered voice said, "Come out." My hands shook. Then the knob turned slowly. I screamed and swung the bat at the door. The door didn't budge. A loud voice shouted from the bottom of the stairs, "Hey! Police! Get out of the house!" The footsteps ran down the stairs and out the back door. I heard a car speed away down the street. I ran downstairs and locked the doors again, trembling. I called 911 and waited with the police until they arrived. They found footprints in the garden leading from the woods behind our house, but no sign of the man. The police said it might be a burglar casing the place. My parents came home the next day. We installed an alarm system and security cameras. That night, I slept with my bedroom door locked and the bat by my side. Sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I still hear tapping at the windows. Story the end. Understood, you want a realistic, true Home Alone at night horror story, American setting, full story at least 2,500 words, no instructions, titles / parts, ending with story the end. This is a substantial piece, so I will deliver a carefully crafted narrative that unfolds naturally and deeply, reflecting true-to-life fear and tension. I'll begin composing it fully now. The sky had already turned that deep, ink-black shade of late fall night when my parents drove off, leaving me alone for the first time in our house in the outskirts of a small town in upstate New York. I was 17, had always been a pretty independent kid, but something about that night felt different. They were going to be gone for 2 full nights, a trip to visit some distant relatives, and my only contact was a short text message. "Lock up tight, don't answer the door, call us if anything feels off." I nodded at the door as they pulled away, locking it behind me, checking every window on the way upstairs. The house was old but well kept, a two-story Victorian with cray-crays. It was a chilly November evening in a small town outside of Chicago when my parents left me home alone for the first time overnight. I was 17, used to being left alone for a few hours here and there, but this was the first time I would be by myself for the entire night. My parents were attending a family wedding a few hours away, leaving me the house keys, some money, and a long list of instructions about locking doors and not answering the phone or door for anyone. At first, everything felt normal. I ordered pizza, watched a couple of episodes of a show I liked, and texted my friends now and then. The house was big and a little drafty, but it was familiar and safe, or so I thought. Around 11 p.m., after cleaning up from dinner, I started hearing things. It was subtle at first. A faint creak here, a soft thump there. I figured it was just the house settling, old wood contracting in the cold night air. But then came the footsteps. They were light at first, like someone pacing slowly on the floor below. I froze, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. I told myself no one would break in with the neighborhood so quiet and my parents' car gone. Still, I locked every door and window again, checked the deadbolt, and even put a chair under the doorknob of the front door, just to be sure. Then the power went out. The whole house went black. I was plunged into darkness, the silence suddenly overwhelming. My phone screen illuminated the room as I fumbled for a flashlight. That's when I heard the doorbell ring. One ring. Then another. Then a steady ding-dong. I didn't answer. I didn't move. Instead, I called my parents, but there was no answer. I tried 911, but the call wouldn't go through. My fingers trembled as the doorbell rang again. This time, a faint voice whispered from outside, "Let me in, please." I ran to the back of the house, locking myself in the bathroom. The knocking started on the bathroom window. It was faint, but relentless. My breath caught in my throat. I texted my friends frantically, but no one replied. Then, from the vent above the bathroom door, came a faint scraping sound. Someone was inside the house. I don't know how long I stayed in that bathroom, curled up and shaking, but eventually the police arrived, alerted by a neighbor who heard the doorbell ringing for over an hour. They found muddy footprints by the back door, an unlocked window, and some strange symbols scratched into the walls. Whoever was inside was gone, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me for weeks. Even now, when I'm home alone at night, I check the locks twice and listen closely for any sound that might not belong. Story, the end. It was a late autumn Friday night in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Ohio, the kind of night where the wind rustles dead leaves across empty streets, and the only light comes from the dim glow of porch lamps and the occasional passing car. I was 17, and for the first time ever, my parents had left me alone in the house overnight. They had to visit some relatives a few hours away and promised to be back Sunday afternoon. I wasn't exactly thrilled to be left home alone, but I assured them I would be responsible. As they pulled away in the car, I locked the front door behind me and double-checked the windows upstairs and downstairs. I told myself everything would be fine. The neighborhood was safe, and I had my phone in case of emergencies. My parents left detailed instructions. Don't answer the door for anyone. Keep all the locks engaged, and check in with them regularly. I started the night by ordering a pizza, watching a few episodes of a TV show, and then scrolling on my phone. The house creaked now and then, as old houses do, and the wind made the branches tap rhythmically against the windows. Around 10:30 p.m., I decided to get ready for bed. I showered, brushed my teeth, and headed upstairs. The house was dark and quiet, apart from the occasional hum of the heater. Just as I was about to turn off the hall light and head to my room, I heard a faint noise downstairs, like something scraping softly on the wooden floor. I stopped and listened. The sound came again, a quiet, rhythmic scraping, followed by a faint thud. My heart started pounding. I told myself it was probably the house settling or the wind moving something loose in the kitchen. Still, I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to my mom. Heard something downstairs. All good, just a little nervous. She replied almost immediately. Stay upstairs, lock your door, call us if anything else happens. I tiptoed to my bedroom and locked the door behind me. Then the house went completely silent. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate footsteps crossing the floor below my window. I pressed my ear against the door and could faintly hear a low, muffled voice saying something I couldn't make out. Panic washed over me. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen. Then came the unmistakable sound of the front door unlocking. I reached for the landline phone on my nightstand, but before I could pick it up, the doorbell rang sharply, ringing out through the silence. I didn't move. My breathing was shallow, barely audible. Then I heard the front door open slowly. Footsteps entered the house, moving up the stairs toward me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my address and pleading for help without making a sound. The footsteps stopped right outside my bedroom door, a soft knock. "Please, I won't hurt you," a voice said quietly. I whispered back, "Who are you? What do you want?" No response. Then the doorknob started to turn. I bolted to the closet, shutting the door behind me. My phone was in my hand, the screen glowing dimly. The door opened just a crack, and I saw the outline of a man standing in the doorway. He didn't enter. He just stood there. After what felt like hours, he turned and left. I stayed in the closet until I heard sirens in the distance. The police arrived and searched the house. They found the back door forced open and muddy footprints everywhere. They arrested the man a few blocks away. He had been stalking several houses in the neighborhood. I never wanted to be alone in that house again. Story the end. The first night I was as ever truly alone in my family's house is something I still replay in my mind. Sometimes late at night when the house creaks just a little too much, or the wind whispers through the trees in a way that reminds me of that night. I was 17, almost 18, living in a small town in Pennsylvania. My parents had gone out of state for a weekend to attend a wedding, and my older sister was at college several hours away. The house felt bigger than ever with just me in it. Rooms that once felt warm and comforting suddenly seemed cavernous and unfamiliar. That Friday, the air was cold, with an early autumn chill settling in. I had spent the day catching up on schoolwork and texting friends, occasionally looking out the windows at the barren trees lining the quiet suburban street. The neighborhood was usually peaceful, neighbors keeping to themselves, the occasional dog barking in the distance. The sun set early in November, and by 6 p.m., darkness had crept over the house. I made myself dinner, a microwaved burrito, nothing fancy, and then settled in the living room with a book. The house's old wooden floors creaked beneath me whenever I shifted, and the heating system clattered and groaned in bursts. Around 9:30 p.m., I decided to get ready for bed, brushing my teeth and turning off the main lights. Before climbing the stairs to my room upstairs, I double-checked every door and window in the house, locking them all. The front door was solid oak with a heavy deadbolt, and I made sure it was secure. The sliding glass door in the kitchen was locked tight, and I ran my hand along the windowsills to make sure nothing was left open. Upstairs, my room faced the backyard, with 2 large windows framed by heavy curtains. I pulled the curtains shut, but not fully, just enough to see the faint outline of the yard outside, illuminated by a lone streetlight. I climbed into bed around 10 p.m., pulling the covers up to my chin. My phone was on silent, charging on the nightstand. I flipped through social media for a while, then put the phone down and closed my eyes. I don't remember when exactly I fell asleep, but I woke suddenly sometime after midnight to the unmistakable sound of a knock. Tap, tap, tap. Slow and deliberate, coming from downstairs. At first, I thought it was just a noise from the old house, the kind of settling sound I was used to. But then it came again, louder this time, 3 knocks. Pause. Pause. 3 more. My heart started pounding in my chest. I lay frozen, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But the knocking continued. I reached for my phone, heart in my throat, but the screen was dark. I grabbed the flashlight I kept on my nightstand, just in case. Carefully, I slipped out of bed and crept to the door, trying not to make a sound on the creaky floorboards. I cracked the door open just enough to listen. Silence. I tiptoed down the stairs, gripping the flashlight tightly. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside filtering through the windows. As I approached the living room, I saw movement outside the front window. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the glass, too tall to be a neighbor's kid. The figure raised a hand and tapped on the window 3 times. I stumbled back, heart racing. I locked the front door again and ran to the kitchen to check the back sliding door. It was slightly ajar. I slammed it shut and locked it. The knocking grew louder, now coming from the back door. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers and whispered my address. The dispatcher told me to stay inside and wait for officers. I sat in the dark living room, flashlight in hand, waiting. Minutes later, I heard the sound of footsteps running away. When the police arrived, they searched the perimeter but found no one. They said it might have been a prank or a break-in attempt, foiled by my locks. But the feeling of being watched stayed with me. In the following days, strange things happened. My porch light flickered off without explanation. I found muddy footprints near the back door. My phone battery drained quickly, even on standby. At night, I sometimes hear tapping on windows or doors, though no one is there. I'm no longer alone in that house. Story the end. It was mid-November in Madison, Wisconsin when it happened, right after the clocks had gone back and the dark crept in earlier each evening. My parents were out of town for the weekend, visiting my uncle who just had surgery in Illinois. I was 17 at the time, a senior in high school, and pretty used to staying home alone for a night or two. Our house wasn't isolated. It sat in a decent suburban neighborhood, plenty of neighbors around, but there was a long wooded lot behind the backyard. Not forest exactly, but dense enough to feel wild at night. That Saturday evening started normal. Cold air had settled in, and I had the heat on low, just enough to keep from freezing. I remember heating up leftover chili from the night before and carrying it into the living room to eat while rewatching an old movie on Netflix. I wasn't expecting any calls or visitors. I'd told a couple friends I was studying that weekend, and it was true. I had a big calculus test coming up Monday, but I was procrastinating hard. It was a little after 8:30 p.m. when I heard the first noise. I thought maybe it was the house settling. That old excuse people use, right? But it wasn't the slow groaning of wood or a creaky pipe. It was a crisp, muffled knock. 3 of them. Not on the front door, which was just a few feet to the right of the living room. It sounded like it had come from the side of the house, from the outside wall. I paused the movie. Didn't move. The knock didn't repeat. I got up and went to the kitchen window, which had a view of the side yard between our house and the neighbor's fence. Porch light didn't reach there very well. It was mostly dark. I squinted but saw nothing. Just shadows. After a few minutes, I went back to the couch. Told myself it could have been a squirrel, maybe something knocked over by wind. I hit play. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. But this time it wasn't a knock. It was footsteps. Soft, slow ones. I could hear them faintly from the back deck, which was just outside the kitchen sliding glass doors. I muted the TV immediately. The hairs on my neck stood up, not because the steps were loud, they weren't, but because they didn't sound like they belonged to someone who wanted to be heard. They sounded careful, sneaky. I crept into the kitchen and crouched beside the counter. The curtains were drawn, but there was a narrow gap. I peeked out through it. At first I didn't see anyone, but then something shifted. Just the faintest movement at the far end of the yard near the tree line. A man. He was standing maybe 20 feet from the deck, partially obscured by the dark. He wasn't doing anything, just standing there, not moving, facing the house. I stayed frozen in place, peeking through the curtain slit. My mind started racing. Maybe he was a neighbor, but no one I knew looked like that. He was tall, maybe 6'2" or more, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood up and something shiny at his side. Keys? A tool? I backed away from the curtain. First instinct was to call my parents. I grabbed my phone from the couch. My hand was shaking. I pulled up my dad's number and called. Voicemail. I tried my mom. Same thing. Next, I called 911. I didn't wait. I whispered to the dispatcher, explaining that someone was in my backyard. I gave them my address. She told me to stay on the line, lock the doors, and hide somewhere safe. Officers were being dispatched. I hung up and immediately checked the back door. Locked. Deadbolt in place. Same with the front. I went room to room, checking windows, drawing blinds, making sure every entry was secure. When I got back to the kitchen, I took another look through the curtain. He was gone. I should have felt relieved, but somehow that made it worse. He could be anywhere now. Around the side, behind the garage, even trying to get in. I turned off every light in the house. It was a full moon outside. which cast just enough glow through the windows for me to see by. I crept upstairs to my room, grabbed the aluminum bat I kept in the closet, then slipped into my parents' room. It was bigger and had a better view of the backyard. I lay on the floor beside the bed, out of sight, and waited. Every second felt like 5 minutes. Then I heard it, the sliding glass door in the kitchen. It shook. Once. Twice. Someone was trying to open it. I pressed my body flatter against the carpet, heart racing so hard I thought it would give me away. Then I heard something else, another sound. This one sharp and deliberate, metal scraping against glass. He was trying to pry the door open. I wanted to scream, to make some kind of noise, but I was paralyzed. My phone was still in my pocket. I fumbled for it, trying to call 911 again, but before I could, I heard a car engine. Then red and blue lights lit up the front of the house. The police. I ran downstairs, bat still in hand, and met the officers at the door. They searched the backyard, found boot prints in the frost-covered grass leading in from the woods around the house and ending at the back deck. No signs of forced entry. He hadn't gotten in, and he was gone by the time they arrived. The police took a full statement and stayed for about 30 minutes, even drove the neighborhood looking for anyone suspicious. Nothing turned up. They said to call if anything else happened, then left around 10:15. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed in my room with the bat, a chair braced against the door, lights on. Every creak in the house made me jolt. When my parents got back the next day, I told them everything. They were rattled, obviously, and my dad had motion lights installed and cameras put up that same week. For a while, I thought maybe that was it, just some creep passing through looking to break in. Except 3 weeks later, it happened again. Not while I was home alone. This time it was a Wednesday evening, and both my parents were there. I was in my room doing homework when my mom shouted for my dad. I came downstairs and found them in the kitchen, staring out the window. There, at the edge of the yard, was a man. Same hoodie, same stance. This time, my dad ran outside with a flashlight, yelling, but the man took off into the woods before he could get close. Police came again, boot prints again. Still no solid lead. The scariest part came the following morning. When we reviewed the security footage from the night before, we saw something none of us expected. At around 2:47 a.m., hours after we'd all gone to bed, the camera above the garage showed the man walking calmly up our driveway. He didn't go to the door, didn't try anything. He just stood there for almost 10 minutes, staring at the house. Then he walked away. No more incidents happened after that. We replaced every lock in the house, added cameras and motion sensors in the backyard, and my dad even bought a German Shepherd from a breeder out in the country. We named him Ranger, big, loud, and impossible to sneak past. Still, I'll never forget the way that man stood there in the dark like he was waiting, like he knew we were watching, and he didn't care. Sometimes, even now, when the dog perks up at night and stares out the back door, I think about those boot prints in the frost, and I wonder if he ever really left. Story the end.